men struggle to get preventative health care. They die by suicide at higher rates than women, and they have a difficult time getting help when they have mental health challenges. We worry about literacy rates among elementary school-aged boys, and we're thrilled to have Governor Cox and Lieutenant Governor Henderson leading out on a 2026 literacy initiative that will ensure that all students are literate by 3rd grade. One of Utah's greatest strengths is our families. We need strong husbands and strong wives. We need strong mothers and strong fathers. We need everyone to be thriving. That is why we are here today. We thank you for your support, and we're especially grateful for the leadership from Sutherland Institute. And I'd now like to turn the time over to my co-chair, Nick Dunn, who's the Vice President of Strategy and Senior Fellow for Sutherland Institute.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks everyone for being here. We'll see if that buzz goes away. Sorry about that. Maybe it wakes you up a little bit early in the morning as we're all here together. Again, I'm really grateful to Amy and the Utah Office of Families, the Governor's Administration, and all of you for being in the room today, and the folks watching online. We're live streaming this event to a broad audience because this is such an important conversation. It's been a privilege of mine to lead Sutherland's Men and Boys Wellbeing Initiative because I think it speaks to something important about why we're all here. And I want to start with a quote that's in the report that we're going to be profiling today. If a man knows not which port he sails, no wind is favorable. Now, I'm not deep into Stoic philosophy, but when I came across this quote, I thought it was really apt for this conversation because the reason we're all here is because we care deeply about the boys and men in our lives and throughout the country, and we're worried about the risk of them not living lives full of meaning and purpose and work and civic engagement. We talk so much about things like deaths of despair, about suicide rates, about men and boys kind of being adrift in society, not anchored to the kinds of things that typically would lead to a really flourishing life. And so we're here because we want to fix that. We want to make a difference. So our new report, which we have copies for you here, and of course it's available online as well for those watching online, that's available at the Sutherland Institute website. What we wanted to do was fill what I would say is a gap in the data and understanding about these issues, because we have a lot of policy data, administrative data. What we needed was experiential data. Imagine if each of you could sit down with every man in Utah, every man in the United States, and just have a conversation, say, how are you doing? What are you struggling with? What's going well in your life? That's the kind of insight that this survey data brings. And I have to give a really strong shout out to Y2 Analytics. They were our partner for this project. They're a fantastic polling firm that did a tremendous job on fielding the survey that we're going to be talking about today. So my job is really to set the stage for today's conversation and help put into context the nature and scope of this issue, help kind of define some of the contours of what it is that we're talking about that we want to try and address as a state and nation. So I'll be brief because there's a lot of great folks we have here to speak with you today. What I want to do in the few minutes that I have is essentially give you 3 broad takeaways that I want you to keep in mind to frame the conversation as we go throughout the morning. And this is drawn from our survey data from this report. Number 1, most men in Utah and across the nation are actually doing pretty well. They remain anchored to things like employment, like family, like faith communities, like other civic institutions. They tend to have a sense of their purpose and place in society. And we can look at these kinds of things as protective factors that correlate with flourishing. So most men say they're not doing okay. Point number 2, the survey evidence also uncovers what I would call a silent, struggling subset of men who are not doing okay, who are struggling across the domains of health, especially mental health, vocation, or purpose. And this ranges from anywhere from 1 in 5 to 1 in 3 of United States men that are struggling in these ways. So it's a minority of men across the country, but those numbers are big enough that they should be concerning to us and worth addressing. And point number 3, there is a strong connection in the survey data between things like religiosity and feelings of purpose and fulfillment, things like family connection, suggesting that there are anchoring civic institutions that can and ought to be part of the solution for those men who maybe seem adrift in some ways. So to that first point, this idea that most men are actually doing okay. So the survey asked, on a scale of 0 to 100, 100 being very good, how would you rate your own mental health? And it was about 75 for men nationwide, about 77, 78 for men in Utah, so pretty decent marks. Similarly, 79% of men nationwide and 77% of Utah men say they're comfortable discussing their own mental health with people in their immediate circle, like a family, friend, neighbor, or coworker. And solid majorities of both groups say it's actually societally acceptable for men to acknowledge and discuss their own mental health challenges. When it comes to vocation, most men in Utah and across the country are employed, according to the survey data. They're generally satisfied with their work situations, and respondents say that employment offers a source of purpose, meaning, and life satisfaction in general. About 60% of men nationwide and 69% of men in Utah say they are completely or mostly satisfied with life as a whole, while 70% of men nationwide and 76% of Utah men say they are very happy or somewhat happy. When it comes to purpose, most men across the board in Utah and across the country say that the things they do in life are worthwhile, though that effect is a little bit more pronounced in Utah. And most men would say that they do understand their purpose in life. So in a lot of ways, this data is encouraging. We're starting from a baseline of most guys out there are doing okay across these domains. Solid majorities report good marks on this front. And it's important to recognize what are the factors that lead to those men saying they're doing okay. Things like we've talked about, employment, family, faith, civic connection, those kinds of things. So that does lead to the second big takeaway, this idea of what about those who aren't doing okay, the ones who are struggling? And the first glaring example of this is on mental health. So nationwide, 30% of men say they don't have anyone they can really talk to about their mental health. So almost a third of men across the country say, if I'm struggling with my mental health, I can't really talk to anyone about it. That's 15% in Utah, so we're about half as likely in Utah to report that struggling. Similarly, across the nation, 22% of men believe that discussing mental health challenges with a professional is a sign of weakness. That actually increases to 29% when asked about discussing mental health challenges with someone in their immediate circle, like a friend, a spouse, a partner, or someone like that. In Utah, it's 9% for both of those measures. So Utah men are less likely to say in any context that discussing mental health challenges is a sign of weakness. So in some critical ways, Utah men tend to do better than the national average when it comes to some elements of mental health stigma for men. There are also some shortcomings in employment as well. About 18% of men nationwide and 13% of men in Utah say they're not satisfied with their current work situation. And then lastly, purpose, which is in some ways the most nebulous and hard to define, but I also think in many ways the most important category. 15% of men nationwide disagreed with this statement, this idea that when asked whether or not they agreed with this question, I am truly needed in society today or have something valuable to offer. 15% of men nationwide said they didn't agree with that. It was 18% of Utah men who disagreed with that. And I think one of the most glaring statistics to me that was really kind of shocking was across the nation, 36% of American men say they were struggling to understand their place in their community or wider society, compared to just 24% of Utah men. So the last point that I want to make is that, again, when we look at this evidence, there is a strong connection in the data between civic institutions like faith, like family, like employment, and others, and concepts of flourishing. And so, for example, overall, when we look at religiosity, there's a strong correlation. Religious men in Utah and nationwide tend to have stronger feelings of purpose. They understand what they're supposed to do in life. Similar trends exist with families as civic institutions. So across the nation, about 69% of men say family gives them a strong sense of purpose. and 52% say faith gives them a strong sense of purpose, again, nationally. So I want to close with, before I turn things over to Ian, with kind of a couple thoughts that can help set some parameters for ways we can think about this issue today and as we move forward talking about solutions. Number one, there's a lot more data into the report. So please grab a copy or reach out to us with questions, and we're happy to discuss all of this with all of you. And also, as you do that, I want you to center your why. Ask yourself, why are you here? Why are you part of this issue and part of this effort? What is the thing that's really driving you to want to fix this? Here's mine. This is a picture of my two little boys. My wife and I have two sons. We're walking in a park near our house. They're very little, and so they're still kind of maybe upstream from many, if not most, of the things we'll be talking about today. But as a father, there's nothing I want more than for my sons to grow up to be healthy, happy, flourishing, good men who contribute and find happiness and purpose in life. And if we channel that why, whatever it is for you, and say we want all boys and young men out there to similarly feel that sense of flourishing and purpose as they grow up, that's the motivation that's going to help us make a difference. So with that, that sets the stage. It's my pleasure now to introduce Ian Rowe. He's a senior fellow for the American Enterprise Institute and the founder of Vertex Partnership Academies. Please join me in welcoming Ian.
Hi there. Do I just click? Yep. Got it. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Nick. It's a great honor to be here at the Boys and Men Symposium. Thank you to the Sutherland Institute and to Governor Cox. I do join you today wearing two hats. I am a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. I research the forces that drive upward mobility and how people achieve the American dream. But it's not just theory for me. I put my ideas into action on the ground in communities, the very communities that we are seeking to uplift. So my second hat is as a CEO who for the last 15 years has led public charter schools in New York City, educating thousands of low-income Black and Hispanic students. And for 10 of those years, I was CEO of a network of single-sex public charter schools, all boys and all girls, elementary and middle schools. In fact, in 2014, I opened the first all-boys pre-K elementary and middle public charter school in the Bronx. In these Bronx communities, many of the issues we associate with poor outcomes for kids, deep poverty, crime, violence, etc., the non-marital birth rate is north of 80%. Many of our boys have strained or non-existent relationships with their unmarried, non-resident fathers. So I have seen firsthand the very issues that boys and young men, and by the way, girls and young women, face early in their life when they miss the anchor institutions. Issues particularly caused by family instability, which is often the origin story of the issues that are far harder to address later in life. Now, the reason I run schools is I want our students to know that they can do hard things. Even in the face of inevitable challenges, they can lead virtuous, self-determined lives with integrity and agency. You know, this, oh, hold on, sorry. Oh, I'll have to make sure there you go. Because that's what my parents taught me. Hold on. All right. I now no longer do any presentations without showing my parents. So these are pictures of my parents, Vincent and Eula Rowe, on their wedding day in 1957 in England. My parents had emigrated to England from Jamaica, West Indies. They ultimately came to the United States in 1968, which you might remember, a very tumultuous time in our nation's history, particularly around issues of race. But my parents weren't running away from Jamaica or England. They were running to the United States. They were married for 48 years. They had a strong religious faith. They believed in education as the common pathway to success, and they practiced entrepreneurship and hard work, the typical story of the American dream. So I am a direct beneficiary of the 4 anchor institutions that, in my view, need to be at the center of our discussions today if we truly want to revitalize the prospects of that segment of boys and men, as well as girls and young women, that are not living the lives of their own choosing. So that's what I want to focus on. How can we replace what I consider to be sometimes an overemphasis with failure and crisis with an effort instead to develop a reverence for the anchor institutions that drive success and upward mobility? The 4 institutions of family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship and work are what I call free. So let me begin by quoting from the Missing Anchors report. As Nick alluded to, most men in Utah and throughout the nation report general satisfaction with their health, work, family life, faith connection, and sense of meaning. Broadly speaking, work, family, faith, and community connection are often protective influences that contribute to men's internal sense of purpose and fulfillment. In other words, these civic institutions can serve as positive anchors that help men lead thriving lives. So note the focus on the institutions, work, family, faith, and community connection, in helping to explain why most men in Utah and across the nation do not seem to be facing the quote-unquote crisis that is the reason for the gathering today. But the report correctly points out warning signs. As Nick mentioned, 30% of US men say they have no one to talk to about mental health. So you're going to hear a lot of numbers like that today. 30% sounds bad. It is bad. But there is always a flip side, because that means that 70%, or some number close to that, of men do have someone to speak with. Who are they talking to? Their wife, their pastor, a trusted coworker? What can we learn from successful men whose success seems to emanate from their interactions with the 4 key institutions? Because if we deeply explore success, I strongly would believe we will make far more progress than obsessing with failure. So for over 30 years, I have worked with kids from every imaginable background. Rich kids, poor kids, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, kids in intact families, kids in foster care, homeless. I've seen kids grow up in extremely challenging situations, domestic violence, poverty, and unfortunately I've seen these kids, as they make their passage into young adulthood, succumb to those conditions, and unfortunately recreate the same disadvantage that they experienced growing up. You know, sadly, this is something we've all seen. But I've also seen kids under those same exact conditions make different sets of decisions that put them on a different trajectory of life to break the cycle of disadvantage that they experience. So the question is, what makes the difference? Right? What makes a difference for those kids who, from someone looking outside, say, oh, that kid is doomed, and yet they're able to change their trajectory? That has been the animating question of my life. And my observation is that students that have been able to break the cycle of disadvantage typically had a sense of personal agency, a belief that they could lead a self-determined life of meaning and purpose. But the sense of agency didn't come from nowhere. They didn't just pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, right? They usually interacted with, in my view, the anchor pillars of family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship. So let's start with family. The young people that I've observed break the cycle of disadvantage recognize that regardless of any dysfunction that they may have experienced in the family that they were from, what was most important is the family they're on the pathway to form. They understood that there were likely rewards associated with different series of life decision-making, especially when it comes to family formation. My colleague Richard Reeves, who hates this particular component of my beliefs, always excited to talk about it, but Richard has said, quote, "The old script for what it meant to be a boy or a man and what role you were going to play in society has been torn up by the changes of the last 40 years, as has the old female script. But we haven't replaced the old male script. That leaves a lot of men adrift." That's Richard. But is that true? What's interesting is my sense is that there are millions of people across the country, and probably many in this room, have led a certain life driven by a certain set of decisions. So is the script dead? But even if you accept that the premise that particularly young people don't know the script for life, then guess what? It's our responsibility to tell them. That is why in our schools we teach the success sequence, which is data that says if a young person completes just a high school degree, then gets a full-time job, so they learn the dignity and discipline of work, and if they have children, if they get married first, 97% of millennials who follow this sequence in that order, education, work, marriage, and children, avoid poverty, and the vast majority enter the middle class or beyond. Causality is very hard to prove, but this seems like good common sense for our students to be exposed to. So that's the first observation that I've had over my time. The second, particularly as it relates to religion, in my observation, students who were able to break the cycle of disadvantage typically had a personal faith commitment. They lived by a moral code. They had a sense of right versus wrong, usually informed by an organized religion, Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism. The key was that it actually doesn't matter. It's just that in their life, they made a personal choice. I love this image. Do you know why the fingers of God and Adam do not touch in Michelangelo's famous work of art on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel? In the painting, as you can see, God's finger is extended to its maximum. But Adam's finger is with the last shortened phalanx. My interpretation of the painting is to explain that God is always there, but the decision is left to Adam. If a person wants to touch God, that person must extend their finger. In my experience, when young people do this, they become part of a community of people that love them, that see them regularly, and they participate in rituals, whether it be Sunday church or Saturday. The idea is that they're now part of a community of people that expect them to live up to a moral code. That's been my observation for the young people who've able, ultimately, to exercise agency in their own lives. Third element of free education, as you might imagine, those people able to break the cycle of disadvantage typically benefited from some kind of school choice, educational freedom, charter schools, education savings accounts. That's part of the picture as well. And then finally, entrepreneurship. If the first three are there, if you're on the pathway to form a strong family, if you have a personal faith commitment, if you benefited from some kind of educational freedom, you typically have developed what I consider to be called an entrepreneurial mindset. You're a problem solver in your own life. Typically, that means you have a strong work ethic, right? That could mean starting a business, but more so it means you're a problem solver in your own life, because life is going to send you challenges, regardless of race, class, whatever. Every person has their struggles. What is the anchor that you're going to have in your life to be successful? And the thing is, the relevance of these anchors is not anecdotal, right? In his study entitled, "Where is the Land of Opportunity?" I'm sure many people in this room, because Salt Lake, Utah is highlighted, Harvard's Raj Chetty researched the sources of intergenerational mobility for more than 40 million children and their parents. The study identified cities where children from families in the lowest 20% of income were most likely to have incomes in the top 20% as adults. Chetty found two Americas, And by the way, this map, how many folks are familiar with this map from the Chetty study? I would imagine this room would have many people. So as you know, this map represents the likelihood of a kid going from the top 20% when born, and then earning in the top 20% at age 30 years old. And the lighter the color, the greater the likelihood of economic mobility. So there's lots of variation on this map, right? Because clearly what it says is what matters to upward mobility and human flourishing is what happens locally. And so Chetty's team, they said America is a collection of societies, some of which are lands of opportunity with high rates of mobility across generations, and others in which few children escape poverty. Salt Lake City was identified as one of the nation's strongest metro areas for upward mobility, which is not surprising given that Utah remains one of the states with the lowest non-marital birth rates in the country. Indeed, a major conclusion that the Chetty team came up with was, quote, "The strongest predictors of upward mobility are measures of family structure," quote, such as the fraction of married two-parent households in the area. They also identified presence of religious individuals and high-quality K-12 education were other factors driving upward mobility. 10 years later, in a follow-up study, Chetty added parental employment as another factor, and this concept of cross-class connections as additional factors driving upward mobility. Well, guess what? Those things drive, married two-parent households also drive those factors. What's most encouraging about the enhanced study was that it reaffirmed that not only is the American dream still alive, it can be achieved in just one generation. Even among the most economically disadvantaged young people, if the anchor institutions are at the center. And I have to say, by promoting the anchor institutions and the ideal family structures, like saying elevating the benefits of healthy married two-parent households over single parenthoods, we're just being honest with young people. We're not demonizing single parents. It is okay to say that marriage is the institution that first bonds a father to the mother as her husband, the original commitment even before children are present. Marriage is the social institution, however imperfect, that does impose moral obligations on a father that no other institution can replicate, certainly not the government. By promoting the anchor institutions, we also don't have to fall into the trap of trying to find gender-specific solutions for boys that are different than girls. The anchor institutions are universally accessible and universally beneficial. Ultimately, we must communicate to young people, especially those that are struggling, that their life can be their own, that there are pathways to happiness, fulfillment, and prosperity, and it is within their grasp if they embrace the very institutions that have fostered human flourishing for time immemorial. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. If I could please ask to come up to the stage, Governor Spencer Cox and Richard Reeves. They'll have a conversation and we'll explore this issue further. As a quick housekeeping item, bathrooms are straight to the back. And just so folks are aware, when we get into the panel conversation, we're not going to have Q&A immediately following each panel, but when the event concludes, there will be some time for attendees to mingle with the speakers as well. So those two seats are great, Governor and Richard.
I think we're both on.
I think we're live. Yeah.
All right. Welcome to Utah.
Thank you.
It's great to have you back, Richard.
Thank you.
We're honored to have you, ladies and gentlemen in the room, and those who are watching online. Thank you for joining us for this this very critical discussion. I'm excited to be able to spend some time with Richard, talk about his book, his research, give you an opportunity to respond to Ian. I think it's appropriate to do that. My good friend, I'm so excited that we're having this conversation. I will just at the outset give the disclaimer that this is a symposium about men and boys. It doesn't mean we don't care about girls and women. That's also very important. Obviously, lots of issues, and I think it drives the fact that there are differences, and we know that the research is very clear that there are differences between boys and girls, men and women, and those differences matter. They're unique. They're important. Now, the reason we're here is a few years ago, I started getting very concerned about the data we were seeing in Utah. We've already heard about deaths of despair, things that were happening there. Started having some discussions with experts here in Utah. And then this book came out that got a lot of attention on boys and men. And I read the book, and I thought, everybody needs to read this book. I didn't agree with everything, but most of it really resonated.
I think my publisher would agree with that
I
statement.
think that's fair, and I think that's important. So I asked my team to read it, and they did. You've been incredibly generous. You came out, you met with our team, and that's where we started down this path. So I want to just start there. We're focusing on kind of three different issues. You heard this today: health, both physical and mental, the vocational piece of this, and then purpose, which is kind of the all-encompassing piece. Can you just tell us where you are now on these issues? The book has been out for a few years now. I'd love to just kind of fill us in on your journey from book to here.
Sure. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you to you for leading this work, Governor, and to the Sutherland Institute. I think this is a great example of how this work should be done, which is in a very non-zero-sum way, as you just said, right? The key word here is and. There are clearly many issues still facing women and girls, which we have to deal with, as well as focusing on boys and men. It's not a partisan issue. It shouldn't be a divisive issue. It should be an issue that we can argue about solutions and the best way to approach it, but I think we should all, in good faith, be able to say, sure, we can look at the data and say, we should be worried about that. And also continue to be worried about the issues facing women and girls. I think part of the problem with the cultural environment, which has been challenging over the last few years, and I'm not making a partisan point there, it's been challenging for different ways. So part of the journey, honestly, has been the approach that you've set out here, and you're an early mover on this, and I want to congratulate you for that and your administration, is to hold to this course of it's not zero-sum. If we want to flourish, we need our boys and men and our women and girls to flourish. And anybody that tries to pit those two causes against each other is damaging the debate and damaging women and families. I think most people get that. But I do think it's quite difficult sometimes just navigating that water. And maybe I'll just ask you a little bit about that, because I think you've been navigating this water for a little while now too. This idea of non-zero sum. Just because you've got this task force on boys and men doesn't mean you're not continuing to work on women and girls. And I don't want to put you on the spot immediately, but I'm going to put you on the spot immediately. So I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's like, how do you think? Because honestly, I've set up the American Institute for Boys and Men. We're doing this work, and part of the challenge is almost each year, the environment changes so radically that staying this course gets more challenging. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, thank you, Richard. I agree completely that we are in challenging times, and these challenging times have been going on for quite some time. We live in a time where the culture wars are at the forefront of everything that we're trying to accomplish. One of the things I loved about this issue in particular is that, as you said, it's not partisan. Now, some of the solutions may be partisan, and we certainly have debates, and we will have that debate about what we think are the reasons behind how we got here and where we need to go from here. But we are here, and the facts are pretty clear on that, and the facts aren't conservative, the facts aren't progressive, the facts are the facts, and that's something we can agree on. And finding that common ground is the first place to start. I so appreciate your framing. I think we need to understand that with most issues, the zero-sum approach is the wrong approach and will lead us to the wrong outcomes almost every single time. I'm very fortunate, and this is being the governor of Utah is the best job in the country. One of the reasons for that is there's extensive data that shows that we are the least zero-sum thinking state in the country. And I think some of the very institutions that we're talking about that are important for boys and men and women and girls also lead us to places where we interact with others who are different than us in ways that lead us to non-zero-sum thinking. We very much reject that here in Utah. We do see that there is nuance, and that's important, that two things can be true at once, so we can hold those two ideas. And so as we've started down this path, of course, we've taken some of the same arrows you have, you know, the eye rolls, of course, we're focusing on men and boys. They're doing great. You know, look at the boardrooms, look at our elected officials in Utah. That doesn't matter. And yet, as you saw from the data, there is a subset, and that's where we have to, we want to focus on the one, and we want no one left behind. We don't want no one to lose their life because of economic disadvantage or because they have a lack of purpose in their lives. And so let's do both things.
Yeah.
We can do that. And you're feeling that, I think, in your work.
Yeah, the founder of the Guardian newspaper in the UK, where I'm originally from, said that opinion should be free, but facts are sacred. So if you start with the facts, which is what I did, I'm policy wonk, as you know, come out of Brookings and government, and you just see these very strong facts, particularly on education, some of which you've heard a bit about, which is that if you just look at the national data, out of high school, boys about 16% less likely to enroll in college. If they enroll in college, they're 30% more likely to stop out of college. And having stopped out of college, they're 30% less likely to re-enroll in college. That's work that my colleague Isaac Bledsoe has just been doing recently. And so if you look at the pipeline, in just the same way you look at the pipeline into women's leadership, right, in the labor market, you can look at the pipeline to the education system and say, our education system doesn't seem to be serving our boys and men well enough. And I think Ian and I would agree about that. The whole issue of mental health, which has really popped, I think, in this data, and I know you're very concerned about, if anything, the two areas that I'm more concerned about or more interested in than I was a few years ago is the issues of mental health, particularly for young men. So again, some work that AIBM has done has shown that since 2010, nationally, the rise in loss of life from suicide has been driven by young men. Before that, and this is part of the whole deaths of despair narrative, it was more middle-aged men, particularly during the Great Recession. But since 2010, really it's being fueled by young men. Gene Twenge and Jonathan Haidt and others have done work on this. It's a big rise. It's like a 30% rise for young men in loss of life from suicide. I'm a father. I have 3 sons in their 20s. Those are the kinds of numbers that I think should trouble all of us. And when the suicide rate nationally is 4 times higher for men than it is for women, I think it's entirely appropriate. And now we have folks in this room who've done good work on this we're going to hear from. It's entirely appropriate to say this seems to be quite a strongly gendered problem, in just the same way there are problems the other way. And the third is, and this is the issue that Ian raised, is the question of fatherhood. And what does fatherhood look like in a world where increasingly it's going to be less defined by that economic provider role, or at least sole economic provider role, for the very good reason that women's economic choices have increased, which was a big part of the point of the women's movement, and hallelujah. But it does then say, okay, so what does it mean to be a dad? And is there anything special about being a dad? And I think that we need to do more work on that space, because fatherhood is an incredibly important pro-social male institution, and we've got to do better on that.
I want to talk a little bit more about that. So just in full disclosure, I'll share a little bit of my background, which colors, of course, everything I do. We all bring our own biases to the table, and it's important to share mine. I don't like to govern by anecdote, but by my personal anecdote is pretty powerful for me. So, born in a very rural community, very low income, one of the poorest counties in the state of Utah, one of the poorest counties in the country. My grandfather used to say that the Great Depression ended and everyone forgot to tell Sanpete County. And so we've just, that's just kind of who we are. Low income family, born into poverty, but so was everybody else, so didn't realize there was much of a difference there. My parents get divorced when I'm 10. I won't go through everything, but I'm a multi-ACEs kid, so adverse childhood experiences, I got a lot of them. And statistically, I shouldn't be here. It just, I don't fit that profile. Very fortunate that I was at that age, when I'm 10. I actually lived with my dad. Brother and sister lived with my mom, very different, very unique. My brother ended up moving in with us a little while later. My dad marries my stepmom, incredible woman. She saves my life. I struggled tremendously, mental health, all of the things. The world could be a better place without me. lack of purpose. I have a faith community that just envelops me. Boy Scouts of America, I'm very involved. Have these, my dad, great human being, have these male role models in my life that really embrace me. Others, not I may have family members too, but outside of my family who care about me, and really turn my life around. Teachers, all the good things, and yada yada. I'm a governor of a state now. So I want you to talk about the marriage piece. Again, I think I've watched debates with you and Ian before. I think they're really important. And then what is the role of a father in this century? What should we be doing? How do we help young men?
Well, I think we will probably all end up agreeing that you don't end up with that sense of agency and purpose and a sense of the value that you had in life, and your own story, I think, speaks movingly to that sense of the idea that the world's better off without you, I think is one of the most powerful predictors of suicide, poor mental health. So if you look at some work that I did look at for the book, and you looked at the words that men use to describe themselves before they take their lives, and when they attempt to, they usually do, the two most commonly used words were about themselves, were I am useless, I am worthless. And so what is it that gives us that sense of we are of value, we are of worth? And I think institutions, thick social institutions, are the answer to that. It is the people around you, it is in the thick of daily life that you get that sense of yourself, your sense of purpose. Right? What those institutions are then becomes the question. Right? So being institutionalized, being unanchored, to use the language of the current report, is in some cases literally fatal, but it's certainly incredibly damaging. What are those institutions? And who are you seeing in them? And the other thing I guess I've changed my mind on a bit is the importance of civic institutions. You mentioned Boy Scouts of America. I'm on the record as lamenting the fact that they've gone co-ed, and that it's now Scouting America. I think there's a space for some civic institutions that take on that gendered role, just as Girl Scouts does and just as some others do. I think the evidence on faith institutions is strong. As far as family is concerned, and this is the point of, I think, productive disagreement between Ian and I, which is that given where we are, and I will say here perhaps outside of certain unusual places like Salt Lake, that actually making sure that fatherhood as an institution is supported, uplifted, and celebrated even outside of marriage is incredibly important now. Right? It's 40% nationally births outside marriage, etc. And what I really worry about is if we end up saying fatherhood matters, which is why everyone needs to be married, to horribly caricature Ian's argument, that sort of benches too many dads, right? So and I'm not even suggesting that it isn't better or easier to do that within a committed marriage relationship. I'm just saying that the facts on the ground are that a lot of fathering now is being done outside of the traditional institution of marriage, and we have to get used to that. And think about what does that mean in terms of family law, what does that mean in terms of fathering programs, what does it mean for incarcerated fathers, and so on. So there's a whole policy agenda around this. If you're worried about dads, you're really mostly worried about non-resident or unmarried dads in terms of their own mental health and involvement with kids. So I think that's where the policy effort has to go. Because Ian's right in his data on the Chetty point. I promise only to do a minute on this, because I've written about it. It's like all of the Salt Lake advantage in upward mobility, which is measured at the household level, is explained by the higher marriage rate. All of it. Salt Lake doesn't have any positive causal impact, it seems, on individual incomes for men or women. It's not good or bad, but those men or women are so much more likely to get married and therefore share household income that puts Salt Lake up to the top. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, of course, but I am saying that it is all driven by that difference in marriage rates, which we're not going to get in Philadelphia anytime soon.
Let me ask this then, I should probably just hand the microphone to Ian. I know, he's over there.
No,
you have done this before.
Don't do that. It's all on YouTube.
You can go watch it, Google it. You can see the discussion. But I would say, I think to our earlier point about nuance, about zero-sum thinking, that I would argue that both of those things can be true. That we can continue to hold up a two-parent household as the gold standard, literally and figuratively. I think it helps with the you know, the dual income piece, the financial piece, as well as all the other pieces that are so important. And we can also figure out how to help those fathers who are not finding themselves in that situation.
Correct. And maybe it's three things can be true at once, because it's also true that father figures can be incredibly important. Think about how often we use the term father figure compared to how often we use the term mother figure. Right? There's a reason for that. And so it just turns out there are just going to be more circumstances where other men can step into some of those roles in different ways. I'm not suggesting it's the same, but actually a piece that was written by Fred Riley, one of our board members, where he talked about the men who helped him to become the man he is today, absent his own father, and it was a pastor, a scout leader, a teacher, and I can't remember the fourth. But is the point being that actually having those men around is incredibly important. And again, as Raj Chetty's in the room, spiritually speaking, he also finds that in communities where there are dads around, the boys do better. There's particularly low-income black communities. The boys do better even when their own dad is not around. We call it father presence in the paper. So there's something about dads being around in a community that seems to help boys even when their own dad's not around. And I think that speaks to this civic piece. Right? I'm very pleased that California, as part of their efforts on boys and men, have done a call to men, because so many civic institutions lack male volunteers. They're struggling to serve boys because they don't have enough men. Big Brothers Big Sisters being a great example of that. So they've done a call to get 10,000 more men into service, because I think those roles of those civic institutions are hugely important. I also think it's why male teachers in K-12 matter, or one of the reasons they matter. I'm going to be honest, I can't point to amazing evidence, and we've had lots of work at AIBM around this, that more male teachers will improve these literacy outcomes, for example. We don't have good evidence on that, and there's competing versions of it. But in Utah, I think it's 20% of your K-12 teachers are men and declining. The role of a male teacher is not just going to be measured by a regression analysis on the impact on their literacy score. It's also, my own son is a 5th grade teacher in Baltimore City now. And I think he's a great teacher. Of course, I'm biased. I'm his dad. But, you know, he's had good evaluations, by the way. But also, when I think about the alternative male role models that the boy, it's a very low-income school, the boys are getting in their own lives, I think about my son standing at the front of that classroom, teaching them. I think about the fact he coaches the soccer team. It's around. And so I think as policymakers, we shouldn't just say civic institutions matter, we should support them, that's good. But also, what environments do we have some say over? And one of them is K-12 education. And I don't think we should just see the number of male teachers go down and down and down and down and not think that's an issue. If we care about male role models, what about the person standing at the front of the classroom every day? That's not a bad place to start.
Well, so let's drill down. You mentioned policy interventions, and I think, again, we have policymakers in the room. We would love to hear, I'm working with my fellow governors. Again, some of us have different approaches. Westmore and I have been working on this together for quite some time. And I would like to hear your kind of summary or pick a couple policy measures that you're seeing implemented across the country that you believe in, that you think we should see more of. You talked about one, teachers in the classroom. Where else should we be going?
Yeah, there's a few, and this will anticipate some of the panels that we're about to have, but male teachers is a big one, and we're seeing more commitments now to saying it is a bad idea to empty the men out of our classrooms. The question then becomes what works to get more men into the classrooms, especially over the shorter term, and it looks like men are more likely to move into teaching as a second career, so lateraling in is important. I think it overlaps with an area I know you've done a lot of work on, which is vocational alternatives to having to go through the 4-year college route. So Governor Moore, for example, has just made an announcement last month on more focus on apprenticeship models into teaching and grow your own models, which could help.
We always love it when other governors follow what we did first.
Right,
It's fine.
okay. Well,
it's all good. No,
it's not zero-sum
it
government.
is not. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. We have this back and forth. I stole his service initiative for Utah, so we like to have some of this. It's good.
I love the male. I also do like what California and you and Governor Moore are doing around male service. I think it is quite, and Robert Putnam and I had a piece in the Times on this. It is quite shocking, the kind of, when you look at the lack of male volunteers in these civic institutions. And I think that we can just unashamedly support those efforts, using, to some extent, your profile to do that. I think that's a big one. And then on the mental health front, again, there's an issue about representation within the mental health professions and just the absence of men in those professions, long run. But even in the short run, training more mental health providers to be comfortable dealing with male mental health issues. There's a program called Men in Mind, which is a very interesting interesting program that's been evaluated to look at that. So I think look at the state level mental health and behavioral services and see, are they representing and reaching out to the people who most need them? I'll give you one example of a state that just looked at its own advertising campaigns, websites, billboard campaigns for its suicide prevention hotline, and 80% of the people featured on all of those images were women. And 80% of their deaths from suicide are men. It wasn't anybody's fault, it's just someone's deciding what images to choose. They're probably very concerned about diversity of all kinds, as they should be. But if you drive around and you mostly see women represented on that particular policy outlet, then you're inevitably going to conclude that it's not for you. And so I think that I don't even want to say it's a branding issue, it's just does this feel like a service that's being offered to you? Does this feel like a masculine coded service? That matters. How it looks and how it feels really matters.
You mentioned kind of your evolving thoughts on civic institutions, and I think Dr. Putnam would agree with that. I think Alexis de Tocqueville would agree with that. If we go back far enough, maybe you could talk more about that piece. What you're saying? How do we've spent a lot of time tearing these institutions down, and maybe some of them for good and valid reasons, but instead of adjusting those institutions in positive ways, getting rid of the negative, embracing the positive, we've lost them altogether. And I think there is a sense of loss, a sense of a lack of purpose that men especially are feeling. Any thoughts on the return of those civic institutions, or what we can do to bring some of those back? Yeah,
because I think this is also a difficult thing to talk about in some ways. I think it's good that we're talking about it. Robert Putnam, social scientist, came to me, and he'd actually been looking at the so-called boy problem. It wasn't a boy crisis, and I think neither of us are using that term anyway, in the early 20th century as a result of urbanization and kind of moving into the cities, and just actually really struggling with a lot of young men, boys and young men. And the response was partly policy-oriented around education, public education, but within the space of 1 decade, we essentially created most of those boy-serving institutions that we think of today, or imported it, Boy Scouts, Boys and Girls Clubs, and Big Brothers, Big Sisters, being created very, very quickly. So there was a civic response. And it was also a response that was encouraged by women, but led by men. Now, over time, those institutions have changed their character such that they no longer explicitly serve boys and men. And I understand why. I understand that there's something that I think a lot of people will struggle with around the idea that, like, why do we have these institutions, especially for young people, that are just for boys or just for girls? But I think the answer to that is because there are certain environments where you can actually do more of the skill development, character development in a single-sex environment. I just think that's true. And so it then worries me that those institutions are now primarily serving and staffed by women. And again, when I say that, I'm going to feel the need to apologize and say, by the way, that is not because we've any problem with the work those women are doing. And in fact, one of the complaints quite often from women is, why are we the ones who are doing all this volunteering, right? Where are the men? Where's the men who are stepping into these roles? And so I'm just going to make the case for civic institutions like Scouts, like Big Brothers, etc., that can specifically and unapologetically serve boys and men, as well as those that serve women and girls.
Thank you. I completely agree. It's critical to who we are. There are also a lot of other problems that are downstream of this, not just the mental health or the economic success of men and boys. The polarization that we're seeing in our country, I think, is largely downstream from that as well. Let's shift to the faith piece. I think, again, in Utah, one of the inherent benefits that we have here is that we lead the nation in regular church attendance. Those faith institutions are important in the formation. I think a lot of these are kind of are cheat codes of sorts to developing the virtues that make us better human beings, better men. Again, family formation does that. When you're a dad, there's an added responsibility you didn't have. You kind of feel that intensely. But faith is another one of those that where you get, it's not the only place you can get virtue, of course, but it is one place where you can regularly be told that this is wrong and this is good, and you interact with people, you find purpose, that there is something bigger than this world, something bigger than this life. There's a reason that we should be acting in a certain way. Character formation happens there. And yet, the data is also very clear that fewer and fewer people are going to church. There's maybe some data showing a little bit of a revival, but not as much as I think most people would hope for. And so, your thoughts on faith and why it matters, if you think it matters, and how we can encourage that in positive ways.
Yeah, I think institutions matter, and faith institutions also do lots of other things too, right? They'll do moral training. There's a strong sense of belonging. The message that you should be getting is that you are of value, right? This point about being of worth. I think that for many people, even when they are perhaps at a very, very dark time in their lives and they're not necessarily feeling that they're of value in their current environment, their own family or their own community, many people will find solace in knowing that they are still seen as valuable in the eyes of God, if that's their particular. So I think it does a lot of work. And I'll add a challenge in a moment. And so I think the way I think about this is, what lessons can we learn more broadly from that? First of all, to not take a kind of reflexively anti-religious stance. I think that should be obvious at this point. But also, what's going well there? What can be incorporated into schools, into other parts of our society? In other words, can we learn from those religious institutions, even if fewer people are going to them, right? What can be transferred across? There is a challenge, though, which is that there are many different kinds of faith institutions, telling lots of different stories to boys and men about what does it mean to be a man in today's world. And so I think that one of the most important spaces for this discussion about what does it mean to be a man are actually in many of our churches, and particularly in our evangelical churches, but I would also add our mosques, where imams and pastors are really having to come to terms with what a lot of young men are thinking now, which is part of some of the backlash story. And so I think it's a live debate, and I think that if we're serious about helping boys become good men, then we cannot ignore what they're hearing in the churches. And I think that there's a danger that people who kind of want a more pro-social kind of masculinity being, if that's the kind of catechism that boys are getting, that they should be involved in that debate. But unfortunately, people who care about that tend to be not that interested in religion. So I think it could be adding to a bit of polarization, where the most religious people, perhaps, are not the ones who would take the view that perhaps we're taking about the non-zero-sum nature of this debate, and instead are in some way sliding back to more traditional views about, yeah, you matter, and religion matters, and you're the head of the household, and women should obey you, right? And that is a very, very bad turn that I really have to hope that churches don't take. So I think it's very much up for grabs, that question. We shouldn't just say church good, because I think that what the messages young men are getting in those churches really matters.
So if we're losing these institutions, and we are you seeing, I often ask, okay, so you're not going to church, great, what are you replacing that with in your life? Are we building new institutions? Dr. Putnam in The Upswing talks about, again, that the Gilded Age coming out of a very difficult time, and the institutions that came out of that. You mentioned some of those for sure. Religious leaders led a lot of that change, that kind of pro-social change, creating some of those institutions. Are you seeing around the country new institutions that are coming up that maybe could be a replacement for learning some of the lessons we've learned from current institutions?
Well, the first one's not an institution, but it is that we have a new project now about boys and men online, led by my colleague David Sasaki, and looking at the kind of pros and cons of online life, because it is quite clear that some boys and young men are finding quite a lot of belonging and community online. And so I think we should have to say that there's some positive there too. That's not an institution, and that's part of the challenge with it, right, is that it doesn't have the same sticking power. It's not as thick. So I think a number of sociologists make a distinction between thick and thin institutions, and Bob Putnam's very keen on these thick institutions, which are much more in person, much more community focused. They have a kind of strong telos, a sense of like, what's the purpose of life? So that is happening. But what I'm encouraged by is you've seen the growth of, there's an organization called F3, I don't know if you know about them, Faith, Fitness, Fatherhood, I think. And Fellowship, thank you. And there, it's kind of, I don't know if they would agree with this description, but it's basically a men's support group dressed up as an early morning workout group for particularly kind of 30, 40-year-old men. And it's very masculine in the way it codes. They have nicknames, they get up early, they work out, and then they have some time. It's not particularly denominational, but some time to be together. I think that's one example. You're seeing a lot more of that kind of thing springing up. But I worry how much sticking power it has. I think that's the question. And so we should be supporting that, etc. But these other institutions that already exist in our communities, including faith community, but also churches of all kinds, but also civic institutions, I think that's where we need to lean. And the policy implications of that aren't clear to me, other than just, like in California, for example, to make that call and use your power to say that's important too. But then think about these areas where the line between a public institution and a civic institution, like a school, is quite blurry, right? That is a place where you can do a lot of civic work. And so I'd be focusing a lot on K-12 schools as well as an instrument through which you can get more civic engagement, especially for boys.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, and again, always looking for new institutions that we can support and continue to help our young men and boys. Your book's been out for a couple of years. I ask authors this question all the time. In retrospect, is there anything you would change in the book? Anything that you've is through the intervening years or the response to it that you would look at?
I also want to give a shout out to I Love You Bro, who I think we're hearing from later.
Yes,
Utah
we are.
Based institution.
Yeah.
Again, like just these emergent groups, I think are really interesting. I don't think that, again, it's back to the and. I don't think that any of them would claim that they're going to replace scouts, churches, YMCAs, Big Brothers, etc. We've got to do both and make them more male-friendly as well. But there's two things. One is, in the response, the book was written very much for policy-oriented folks. And so if there was an issue that I thought was really important that didn't have some sort of public policy solution, I tend to just avoid it. So some of these relational issues, these civic issues, like I don't know what the policy solution is, and I was writing, it was published by the Brookings Press, I'm out of Brookings, I didn't want to go into those spaces if I didn't have good answers. And also, it felt like quite a perilous enterprise anyway, right? And so I wanted to stay on safer ground, honestly, and I think that some of the stuff we've talked about is pretty safe ground. I think some of these other issues about anchor institutions, family, you've mentioned faith, civic engagement, purpose, they're just much harder to talk about. I think they're easier to talk about now than they were. And the second thing, and I'll kind of close with this because it comes back to this point about fatherhood, and it captures this point about being too much of a policy wonk. I write about fatherhood and the importance of engaged fatherhood for kids' outcomes. And there's huge evidence on that. But I'm at an event, and a dad comes up to me, he waits ages to talk to me, he comes up to me and he says, I saw all those charts, I saw you say how important dads are for kids. He said, this was in Wisconsin, I think, and he said, but you didn't say anything about how important kids are for dads. And right now, being a dad is all I have. And in that moment, I realized I had made a terrible mistake, that I had treated fathers as effectively a policy intervention. And I had judged fatherhood against the ground, like, will it be good for kids? And it is, to be clear. But what I'd completely missed, even though this is absolutely the way I think about it, is like, how important is fatherhood for fathers to give them that anchor, to give them that sense of purpose, to help them move forward. So that's my next book. Will be an attempt to redeem myself for that failure, because I reread it, and this guy's quite tearful when he's talking about it. He said, don't dads just, like, my kids mean at least as much to me as I mean to my kids. Why don't you talk about that? I thought because I was thinking about it the wrong way around. And I regret that error, and I'm going to try and correct it.
Well, that's a powerful redemption arc, a powerful plug for your next book, which I love. Well done. And but more importantly, I just want to, and I know our time is up here, but there was something you said in that answer that I think matters. You said it felt perilous at the time. It's easier to talk about now. And one of the reasons it's easier to talk about now is because of you and your book. I think you changed the discourse for all of us. Again, even in a very conservative state, we were having some of these conversations, but it did feel a little fraught for us to have those conversations at the time. We knew there would be backlash for sure. We hoped everyone would see the non-zero-sum thinking and the wisdom in focusing on this growing problem that we see with our young men and boys and our older men too. And I just want to thank you for engaging in the conversation. I want to thank you and Ian for the passionate debates. I love that we're having these debates. That's the good stuff. I truly believe that one of the problems in our country isn't that we disagree too much, as Yuval Levin has said, your colleague, it's that we don't disagree enough in the right places. We should be having debates. And if you don't feel like you can even talk about it, then we've lost the thread altogether. You've made it possible for us to talk about, to find our disagreements, to hash out the policy on this, and the competitive nature of the way our nation was founded. We're going to see if what California does works. We're going to see if what Maryland does works. We're going to see if what Utah does work. And then we're going to copy what the other states are doing. I don't care if it's a red state or a blue state. If it works, we're going to do it. And thank you for sharing that with us. We hope you enjoy your time here in Utah, and we hope to have you back again soon.
Thank you, Governor.
We'd like to thank Richard Reeves and Governor Cox for that couch conversation. Very intriguing, very enlightening. We're grateful for their leadership. We'd now like to call up our first set of panelists. We have, this is our mental health panel. And so we have Joe Tuiaana from the I Love You Bro Project, and Dr. Eric Monson from the University of Utah Health and Huntsman Mental Health Institute, and Representative Steve Elison from the Utah House of Representatives. If you'll join me up here, we're going to talk about men and mental health. Okay, let's see. Maybe we'll get you. Do you want to play with that? See if it works. Well, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate you guys. You are great leaders in this space, and we're so glad to have you. I'd love to start first by having each of you introduce yourself, maybe just a minute to kind of introduce who you are and why you're here. So, Joe, do you want to go first?
Yeah, you did. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. My name is Joe Tuiaana. I'm the founder and CEO of the I Love You Bro Project. We are the only men's mental health suicide prevention organization that is evidence-based in the U.S. And so we provide weekly support groups for men, safe spaces for men to open up and share and connect. I came into this about 4 years ago. Man, this year will be 4 years ago. It's crazy. Just on my way to a basketball game with my kids, and came across a bro in a suicide crisis, and just had one of those kind of Hollywood moments where you're just, what do I do? What is happening here? And so I said a quick little prayer, just saying, just please, Jesus, let this guy know that he's loved, and had some inspiration just to open my arms to him, like I wanted to give him a hug. And was able to grieve with him and love him off the ledge, so to speak. And then we invited him over to our house to see, kind of just learn about him. And turns out he had some pretty normal problems, challenges that men face. And we Googled some resources for him. I just wanted to go, I very much represent an average Joe here in all that I do with I Love You Bro. I just wanted to go help this dude out. And there was nothing specifically for men. There's no very generalized campaign, good campaigns, but nothing specific for men and his needs. And so I was like, I think I can help this guy. I know I'm good with people. I can talk well. I connect well with people. So I started just a first support group for him and his needs. And then now we have, by the end of this year, we'll have 16 weekly support groups throughout the state of Utah. So.
Fantastic, thank you. Dr. Monson.
So, hi, everybody. Oh, this one? Yes, I think this is working a little better. So, I'm Eric Monson. I'm a physician through the University of Utah, the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, particularly a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm also a researcher, and for a little more than a decade have been researching specifically suicidal behavior, and over the last several years have been particularly researching suicide in the state of Utah. I represent and am part of the leadership of the Utah Suicide Mortality Research Study, which is a really unique resource in the world. It represents a huge and collaborative effort between the state of Utah, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the University of Utah to try to understand better where the risk for suicide arises from. I also serve as part of the Utah Suicide Prevention Committee and Coalition, and try to work in other areas where we simply try to understand how different types of mental health exposures and how other life exposures just intersect with the risk for suicide, because there's a lot of unknowns out there in how suicide happens. And so that's really my role here.
Thank you. Representative?
Yeah, to just really answer your question directly, because my good friends Stan and Amy asked me to participate, but maybe the reason they asked me to participate is I've been in the legislature for 15 years, and when I ran for office, it was not on a platform related to mental health whatsoever. It was about lowering taxes, fiscal responsibility, that kind of thing, which I've worked on. But we had 3 children die in my son's middle school from suicide, and a young boy in the scout troop, glad to hear him talk about scouting earlier, whose father was incarcerated, lived with a single-parent mom, who's said to me, Steve, kids are dying in my school and nobody's talking about it. And then I met with one of the parents that had lost one of these children who cheerfully pled with me to do something about it. That I really knew nothing about this, and so I went and met with the principal. They created a great program for families, youth protection seminar. That was my first bill to require every school district to do this. They could opt out if they didn't think that these were issues facing youth in their district, and we've only had one district over the past I think 13 years opt out. So that was the first bill I've ran and been involved with, I don't know, 50 to 70, I don't really count, mental health bills since then, and it's become a real passion. But shortly after I started working on it, my own son was hospitalized, and so it brought it home very viscerally that these are issues facing every family. As Dr. Thomas Insel said, the former director of the National Institutes of Mental Health, he says, there's only 2 types of families in America, those that have been impacted by mental health and those that haven't yet. So we're making good progress, and glad to be here with this esteemed panel today.
Well, thank you. We're really grateful to have all of you. I want to just share an experience I had actually this last Monday. I was speaking at the Murray Rotary Club, and one of the things that I ended up sharing with them was about the new mental health crisis receiving center in Salt Lake County. And I don't know how many of you are Rotarians. Anyone belong to Rotary Club? Awesome. Mayor Burton, great. But generally, it was an older population, mostly male. And as we talked about mental health, one guy raised his hand and he said to me, so if somebody needs to go to this mental health crisis receiving center, do they just show up and say, hi, I'm a crazy person, or do the police need to take them there? And I ended up spending several minutes sharing some of my own family's struggle with mental health to kind of help relate with him a little bit better. But also, I felt compelled to tell that people who have mental health challenges aren't crazy, that every family, like you said, will be dealing with them, and share specifically that if any of you in this room feel like you want to harm yourself or take your life, please talk to somebody. There's people who care about you, and this is why Rotary clubs and other institutions are so good, is because you get that connection, right? So, Dr. Monson, I'd love to have you talk a little bit about what are some of the barriers that you see in helping men get mental health help, and how do we address those barriers?
Absolutely. Well, this is a big question, one where I won't have all of the answers, and I'll just touch on this kind of from a high-level viewpoint. But I think that, certainly one of the biggest barriers to men receiving mental health care is stigma. We've put a lot of effort for a long time in trying to address things like stigma, but it remains a significant problem. And I'll touch on a couple ideas with that in a moment. Other barriers, though, that do exist include men have a tendency to minimize symptoms that they're experiencing. And so because of that, when they're in front of a mental health provider, they're less likely to receive recommendations to receive additional treatment because they say that there's nothing wrong. And I think that's a big challenge. I think other challenges is that men have mental health symptoms that are not the same as women, and in general, a lot of the descriptions that we have for things like depression and anxiety come from the most common symptoms and the most common people who present in front of healthcare providers. And again, not to diminish the mental health challenges that women have, but a lot of those conditions are described from the basis of what is most common for women. And so because of that, men may not even recognize themselves, nor may their providers recognize that the symptoms that they're experiencing are representative of a significant mental health problem that needs further treatment. And so that can also be a significant challenge. There are also fears that men have about the impact that a mental health disorder might have on their career and on their ability to remain functional in life, and so they may choose to conceal symptoms that they have because of that. And so there's many challenges that come into play. How we address these, I mean, if there were a simple solution, we would already be doing it, I'm sure, and there's lots of steps that are required to address challenges like these. But I think that one of the first and foremost is that we need to be doing, I mean, the stage has already been set for this, but we need to be developing more community interventions. There's good research out there that demonstrates that men are more responsive, especially to community-based interventions that especially contain peers of theirs. And so efforts like Joe is involved with are so critical because men need to be able to see positive messaging about seeking mental health treatment, about caring for themselves mentally. We also need to be offering more education, not only to the general public about mental health symptoms in males and how they present differently, but also to providers to ensure that we're well educated and we know what to recognize where the warning symptoms are. I think as well from a policy standpoint, we can be doing things like ensuring that there are policies in place that assure the security of men if they do have mental health problems in their employment, that they will be able to remain gainfully employed even as they seek treatment, that they have provisions in place to get that treatment, that we have parity in place for those treatments. I mean, again, this is just high-level stuff, but I think all of it needs to be taking place.
Really good point, and I love what you said. We're burning through these mics. I love what you said about needing a sense of community and like a group to talk to. From the DHHS report that I mentioned earlier this morning, they said that marriage is a protective factor for men's mental health, but not always is it your spouse that maybe they feel comfortable talking to. Joe, you've done a lot of work in this space. This is what got you going on your nonprofit to help men who are struggling with mental health. And that support network of their peers is a really important component. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I take everything. All of our groups are very simple. I took some elements from other successful groups that I'd seen out there. We have, in our groups, it's very clear that we are average Joes for average bros. We push and lean into, we are not clinicians, and we live there. That's our space, and a huge benefit to these guys. When I have a board clinician come to one of our groups, it changes. It changes the tone of what we talk about. And so when we're talking about men and their mental health, just to be clear, so our data is we're 1 in 5 about of bros that come in who are having or experiencing suicide ideation. Of that 1 in 5, it's like 19% that actually have a plan for suicide. So when we're talking about support groups, society and community they have a different view of what those words even mean. They think criminal, they think addict, they think negative. And so when we're trying to connect men, when we're trying to give them a space to be open, to be and show and be real, it requires them being there. I have lots of people like, Joe, when are you going to start doing some streaming, some remote? Never. I want you to show up here. I want you to put in the work. I want you to be here. I will do the best I can to provide the space and the facilitation for that communication and connection, but you got to show up, man. You got to be there. You know, our data also show we're at probably 61% divorced in our groups, 61%, 30% unemployed. And so when we're talking about men and the value we bring, we put a lot of our value in being a dad, being a husband, a lot of our value in our job and how much money we make. So when you remove these things from us, or they're taken or they're lost from us, we have no direction. A lot of our guys who are experiencing these heavier challenges in our groups, they have tunnel vision. They can only focus on that thing. And so our groups provide, through our connection, through our vulnerability and sharing, a peripheral vision for men, so you can see things from a different perspective. And so when we're talking about having a group that's a community, the goal for us, we know 79% of the men in our groups will not reach out to 988 when they're in a suicide crisis. What they will do is come to our groups. So we're trying to establish what I call 2 a.m. bros. Notice I say bros instead of men for everything. But we're establishing those 2 a.m. bros relationships, connections where men can, I may not call or text 988, but I have a couple guys who I've been able to emotionally bond with in a setting that was safe for me that I can reach out to when I'm not feeling, or I feel like I need a drink again, or I'm feeling, these challenges, overcome me and overwhelm me. So this connection very much for us is in person, it's in a group. It is uncomfortable conversations, but I love uncomfortable conversations. That's what I live for, and that's what we need to do more, is really have these conversations with them. So.
I love that. Well, especially when we saw some of the data that Nick showed this morning, that 15% of Utah men don't have someone they feel like they can talk to about mental health, and you're providing this opportunity for them to connect in ways that actually help them open up and get real help. I love that. I want to talk more about the data that you have to it here in a minute. Representative Elison, as we look at some of the issues specifically related to suicide, we see there is a very high number of suicides that are completed through firearms. How does that play into the whole government discussion related to getting help for men? I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, that can be a very politically contentious challenge. A few years ago, I was asked to speak at the American Association of Suicide, or American Psychiatric Association's annual meeting on preventing mass shootings. And the psychiatrist who asked me to speak was from Ireland, and he said, Steve, I'm from Ireland, and when I got to America, somebody told me almost every physician in America is Republican except for psychiatrists, and they're all Democrats. And he's like, you're going to be talking to a room full of psychiatrists, which was standing room only. You're Republican talking about guns. You got a really fine line to walk. And I'm like, I've got this. And so what I did is I laid out a political linear programming. Now, some of you, when I say linear programming, you might start, flinching or something going back to college algebra, but it's really simple. You have a system of constraints, and you need to solve the problem within those constraints. In this political public health challenge, two of our largest constraints are the Second Amendment and the fact that we have about 400 million firearms in America. So if you want to just ban firearms, we still have a few centuries worth of supply on hand. So there's things the government can do and things the government can't do. I think this is most illustrative of a constituent I went to visit, and he said, "Do you want to come in and see my new pink pistol?" I'm like, "Sure." Went into the kitchen, saw it sitting in a drawer in the kitchen. I saw his son in the kitchen, who, through a religious association, I knew was experiencing suicide ideation. So I said to my friend, without telling him, we have laws against childhood firearm access in Utah that hardly anybody knows about, and it cannot be enforced. So what I said is, "Do you want to see my new firearm purchase?" I said, "It's under the seat of my car." And he's like, "Yeah." So we go outside, and I pull out my biometric safe that has a plastic pistol, non-operational, that I use for demonstrations. And I explained to him that people who purchase firearms do it to protect their family and themselves, almost always. Shooting or sports shooting, hunting too, but often to protect their families. I said, but statistically, the gun that you purchase to protect your family, far and away, if someone in your family dies from a firearm, that's going to be the gun. And as I explained this to him, I didn't have to preach to him. I shared the facts, and he said, "My son's struggling with mental health. Maybe I should go lock up that gun in the kitchen." And so that's just illustrative of when we educate people and give resources available, which the state of Utah has given out hundreds of thousands of trigger locks and biometric safes, and educate them that if we simply lock up our firearms, we can dramatically reduce our suicide rate. Women attempt at 4 times the rate of men, twice the rate of men, and men die at 4 times the rate of women because of access to firearms. Suicide is the leading cause of death for children in our state of Utah. Statistically, the guns are coming from their parents, and most of them are unsecured. And every parent I've met, and I've had the last 3 extended family members, all young men, to suicide via firearm, via another family member's firearm. I can't preach this message loud enough. We need to properly secure our guns and ammo. I could keep talking, but for sake of time, I'm going to stop right there, Amy.
Thanks for sharing that. It's an important issue we have to discuss. So I appreciate that. Dr. Monson, you had told me something that I thought was really interesting, and you said, we often, and we've got more mics here. I think that's working, so we can finish your mic really quick. You had said, it's funny, on heart attacks, we educate people on here's what you do, and for so many years, it was just how men exhibited heart attack symptoms until we realized women are different, right? Tell us, you had made the comment to me that just really struck me about how the symptoms for mental health crises are different for men than women. Can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Absolutely, and I think this is super important, and like I say, I think we need to think about education related to this, both from a public but also a provider standpoint. But really, there's a tremendous amount of literature on this. I'm only going to scratch the surface, and so, but a few just kind of hallmark things that I think are really important is, especially when we think about things like depression. Even if I say that word, an image comes to your mind, right? What is depression? We might see somebody who is isolated in a dark place. We might see someone who's tearful. We might see someone, who is losing interest in the activities in their life. And the challenge is that a lot of those are very valid and important connections with the idea of depression. And some men absolutely have symptoms that are exactly like that. But the challenge is that a lot of men have symptoms that are different than that as well. And because of this, they end up getting misrecognized or misinterpreted to be something else. And so, for instance, rather than feeling down and sad, a man is more likely to feel irritable or become aggressive. So men are, in general, more likely to be externalizers. So what that means is that they express their emotionality to the external world around them in various ways. And so that could come across as aggression or irritability. It could also come across as a strong need to distract. And so they may engage in really unhelpful coping mechanisms that to others may look very productive and helpful. So they may lose themselves in their work. They may choose to spend all of their available free time engaging in the workplace. And again, to an employer, this probably looks great. It's wonderful. And even to their peers, this may look very productive. But to the man who's struggling, this is a cry for help, that he can't, that he has nowhere safe to be. And so this is where he's going to be. They're much more likely than women to engage in substance use, and the way that they engage with substances is different as well. And so if you look at something like marijuana, men are 3 times as likely to engage in regular use of marijuana. By that I mean using it on at least a daily basis. They are much more likely to engage with alcohol in an unsafe way. And the challenge with the substance use is that it, by nature of the disinhibition it causes, increases the risk for things like suicide. And that in of itself is one of the biggest challenges I think we face, is that suicidality, has already been mentioned by multiple people here, is very different in men and women. Men are much more likely to use very fatal means to attempt suicide. They are unlikely to have prior suicide attempts compared to women. And because of this, there's less warning that is provided to us. If someone has a suicide attempt that is not fatal, that is inevitably a way that they end up receiving care, because they will usually end up in an emergency room. This is not how men will typically present. And so we have to pick up on some of these other warning signs that arise. One last piece is that men are much more likely, when suffering from things like anxiety, but also depressive symptoms, to be somatizers. And what I mean by that is that they will express those symptoms in physical ways. And so they may be struggling with more headaches or stomach upset or chest pain. And again, or sleep. Yes, insomnia is a significant factor in men particularly. And so, really, being able to recognize that these are factors that may get attention, but they may get the wrong kind of attention, is really important. And so I think that there's several factors here that, as was mentioned with heart attacks, over time we develop public campaigns to help educate that, in a woman, if you're having a heart attack, you may feel stomach upset. It may not, you may not have that classical numbness and pain in your arm, and I think that we have to do a better job at educating people in general, as well as the providers, about these ways that men present in mental health crisis.
Thank you so much. I think that's so informative. Joe, so if I'm a wife of a husband who starts to have some of these symptoms, and I'm worried about my spouse, how do I get them into your program? Or how do you try to recruit men to participate in your program to get help and to have that community to speak with?
That's a huge question that I get asked all the time from women. The one thing you don't want to do as a wife or as a mom or as a daughter is say, here's this support group, you need to go to this. Or
it's got to be their idea, right?
That doesn't work. So, because we're beta tested a lot of this stuff. So, but my best suggestion would be any invitation to openly talk with your husband. As I direct my comments to women, if it's not been prefaced with other emotional conversations where it's been free and you're locking the door on a conversation that's going to be very difficult to unlock. So my suggestion would be, from just an average Joe standpoint, for Aaron, who I started the I Love You Bro project for, was simply just saying, tell me about the way you're feeling. You're carrying a lot. I would love to help you. I want to support you. What is the best way that I can support you? And then you'd be shocked on what that leads to, because these are the same questions that I'm asking the guys in my groups. I've had over 2,000 hours with these guys in my groups, and by the time they get there, they are at their wits' end.
So how do they find you?
Well, they can find me pretty easy. I would say for women, my suggestion would be invite a bro to invite your bro, meaning if you have a brother or a friend or someone of your husband who can reach out to him and volunteers just by coming and showing up to our support groups and just being present there. It's difficult. It is so difficult to get guys in the seats. This is what I do. So, sorry, I'm talking too close to the mic. So, it's gonna take work of the man. We crave work. Men crave work, accountability. We crave that. And when we don't have it in our life, such was Aaron in his suicide ideation. He had an impending divorce, and he had a wife that said, "You're not going to see your son anymore." You take those two things away from any guy in this room right here, we're all going to go into some level of suicide ideation. I promise you. It takes men this quick just to get there. And so my invitation is first learn about suicide. Learn how to talk about it a little bit. The Live On Utah playbook, which came from my Overpass suicide prevention. That's a good place to start. And then to start talking a little bit more about it with your kids. Your husband's never going to want to talk about it, okay? But at least we can start some level of conversation. And please, ladies, if you can, the best thing you can do is say, I'm thankful for you. Thank you for showing up. Thankful for all your work you're doing for us. That kind of stuff weighs so heavy with a man. We put so much value on our work. So when you can include work and thanks in the same conversation, thank you for showing up for us. Thank you for working for us. That seriously does. It helps a lot. That's suicide prevention right there.
So you also do monthly workshops in addition to kind of the support group piece. Tell some of the data that you found related to that help inform your workshops.
So being an evidence-based organization, so every single time a guy comes to one of our support groups, we invite him, they don't have to, but we invite them to fill out a 12-question intake form just on how the challenges they're facing, the relationships at home, emotions they're experiencing. I have a couple board clinicians who will take this data quarterly, and then we analyze it and see where the trends are. And then based on what we see, we bring in professionals to come address some of those things. So right now, currently, loneliness is 63% of our men. Mind you, this is data coming from men who are actually reaching out for help, going to a support group. This is not the same kind of data you're going to be getting from Nick there. So these are men who are actually wanting some help. So when a guy comes in, we're taking this information. Loneliness, number one, 63%. Right after that, 57% is self-worth. Right below that is anxiety. And then between the fourth and the third is a large disparity. I think depression or something is right after, a big gap there. So we brought in, and we continue to bring in professionals and clinicians who that's their specialty, is loneliness. And we teach these workshops once a month to address the concerns that these guys are having. We also have I Love You Sis, an I Love You Sis program for women, where we teach and empower women how to better talk about this stuff with men and how to bring up these conversations, what to do, what are signs to look for, and then also for their mental health as well. And so, and I'll close on this. Our data shows when we ask women in I Love You Sis who they think their husband or the men in their life are most comfortable reaching out to if in a mental health crisis, 40% of, it's huge. 40% of these women choose themselves, okay, as the spouse or partner. When asked the same question to men, it's 9% choose their spouse or partner. And so, obviously, there is a problem in communication in that relationship and dynamic, but it just goes to show that our assumptions are based off of, oh, this guy looks like he's doing a good job, or he looks like he's with it. He's putting on this mask and this mask and this mask. Where if we can start chipping at those masks a little bit, we can start openly talking about some of this difficult stuff. So I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question.
You did. It was great.
So.
We appreciate what you're doing there. It's so important. Representative Elison, I know you've got lots of thoughts on this, so I'm not even going to give you a question. I'm just going to let you say whatever is on your mind right now, because you understand the government has a role, but also some of these other institutions have a role to play here. Talk about that and anything else that you want to say.
Thank you, Amy. Joe, thank you for mentioning the Live On Playbook. You can go to Instagram. The Live On Playbook is a series of 7 or 8 short 10-minute lessons that you can do about how to talk to somebody about suicide, what the signs are, what to say, what not to say. It is first aid mental health for the number one killer of our youth in Utah, and again, 80% of our suicides in America are men. If you haven't done that, I'd strongly encourage you to do that. There's other programs like QPR, mental health first aid. Become conversant on it, because so often we say the wrong things. So thank you for mentioning that. And by the way, I've got a bro I'm going to give you a phone number for afterward, and we'll reach out. So I'll tell you what's on my mind. I fortunately don't have an insomnia problem. I typically fall asleep with my clothes on and, in the middle of the night, wonder what happened. But if there was something that keeps me proverbially awake, it is men in our criminal justice system and their mental health needs. Let me share some shocking statistics. We have about 6,300 inmates in the Utah State prison system. This is not jails, this is in the prison system. Approximately 1/3 have a serious mental illness. So let's do some rough math. That's about 2,000 people. Our two largest psychiatric hospitals, Huntsman Mental Health Hospital has about 170 beds. The Utah State Hospital has about 360. So far and away, the largest mental health institution in the state of Utah, and in every state, are our correctional institutions. There's no debating this. They ask new psychiatry students the two largest mental health institutions in America, and they'll, John Hopkins, or they look at, no, Rikers Island in the Los Angeles County Jail. So if you look at the resources, Huntsman Mental Health Institute has approximately 100 psychiatrists like Dr. Monson, superb professionals. State Hospital has maybe 7 or 8 psychiatrists. The Utah State Prison System just hired 1 psychiatrist. We typically don't have a psychiatrist for thousands of seriously mentally ill, typically, we have some women for sure, largely men. 98% are coming back onto our streets, back into our communities, ill-equipped, and we wonder why homelessness and recidivism is so high. I've had several bills, have another bill on this session. Kudos to Director Gruber, who's here, who's taken over correctional health services, healthcare services. We have so much work to do. I could talk so much about this, but I had one of my former components who came to election opponents came to me and said, my son's in jail, in prison, needs mental health resources. Struggled to get those resources. And less than a year ago, shortly after he was discharged, he took his own life. And this story is repeated day in and day out. And so if we want to focus on an area, and I understand there's not a lobbyist, and I respect lobbyists, they play an important role running around advocating for men in correctional institutions and their mental health. So not the funnest topic, but extremely serious. And if we want to make a difference from a public policy area, we have to focus on this.
Thank you. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to go through each of you, and if you'll just share something that you think this group should be thinking about. You just shared something, something that you're concerned about, and maybe something we can be thinking about or that we should do. I'd love to hear it. Go ahead, Joe.
The best thing that I've learned through the I Love You Bro project is creating the right space is much more important than saying the right thing. We have to create the right space, particularly for men. If we even have a chance of them starting to talk a little bit to us, they talk a lot to me. And I hope that their practice in these groups will help them open up, or that it manifests at home. That's not the case a lot. And they rely completely on the support group. But please, whatever you can, creating the right space will always be better than worrying about saying the right thing. That's all we've done at I Love You Bros, created space. And we've seen miracles happen, so.
And I would just offer, kind of to dovetail with the things that are being said, that it is so critical that we find ways to really reach men where they are. I think this is so essential because, the evidence is just not in our favor that they're going to come and seek the assistance that they need. We've got to find ways to reach them in their communities. We've got to find ways to understand what they're going through. And it just occurred to me as I was hearing Steve talk about, incarceration and mental health, which is such a challenging issue, you know, that in reality, this is one of our big problems, is that because we don't always understand how men look when they're in mental health crisis, the behaviors that they tend to turn to very frequently land them in these situations. And it's, in our society, the way that we have created space for men in mental health is through prisons, and we have to do a better job at creating spaces that are not in that environment. We have to figure out how to find them before they land in those problematic situations.
I'm going to do like the Bob Barker. Remember, he said, have your pet spayed or neutered at the end of every Price is Right. My tagline is, lock up your guns and ammo, have your children and parents download the Safe UT app that you can get 24/7 access to a licensed clinical social worker at the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, anonymously, confidentially, free of charge. And the last thing I'll say is, if you are ever experiencing what you believe to be mental health symptoms, don't wait one day longer to get treatment. Go talk to a primary care physician, call or text 988, go to Love You Bro, get help.
Joe, Dr. Monson, Representative Elison, thank you for being here. We appreciate you. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. I'll now turn the floor over to Beth Akers for our next panel.
Okay, feel free to continue to grab a beverage if needed, but we're going to go ahead and get started to stay on schedule and maximize our content with the fantastic panel that we have. So we're going to take the opportunity now for the next 40 minutes to talk about economic opportunity, pathways to career, which is just such a critical part of this conversation. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Beth Akers. I'm a senior fellow with the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., and also a contributor to the Sutherland Institute here in Utah as a full-time Utah resident for 8 years now, which I'm very proud of. So I became very passionate about this issue of boys and men and feel very fortunate to be part of the task force here in Utah working on this issue. Quite frankly, about 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago now, when I became a boy mom. I have 2 little boys, so as Nick told us to remember our why, my why is very clear to me. I remember it was not quite that long ago, I heard Richard have a conversation with Carol Hooven on his old podcast before this book came out, and he was talking about the differences between boys and girls, and as I had just watched my 2-year-old spike an empty water bottle onto the ground like it was a football, the idea that there are real differences between boys and men and that our policy environment should support those differences really touched a spot in my heart. So that's how I come to this conversation. Even though I'm an economist, my safe space is here in this conversation talking about pathways to opportunity, the economics of boys and men, their opportunity, and the pathways that exist to support getting them into careers. So I have a fantastic group here with me. I'm going to introduce each of you by title, but I would love if we could just walk down the line and you could tell us a bit more about the work that you do and how you come to this conversation. So first to my right, I have Mike Kofed, who is a professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Next, we have Zach Boren, who's the senior vice president at Apprenticeships for America, and Rich Nye, senior advisor for education to Governor Spencer Cox. So Mike, do you want to start and just share how you come to this conversation? And if you feel compelled, you can tell us your why as well.
Oh, okay. So Well, thank you, and thank you to Governor Cox and Sutherland Institute for hosting this. I guess my why and connection here is I am actually a Utah native, grew up in Syracuse, Utah, in Davis County, Weber State grad, and teach economics. My research interests are in labor economics, and in particular higher education, higher ed finance, and higher ed leadership. And I guess my why is, as well as I have 3 little boys, and yes, boys and girls are different now that we have a daughter, but our youngest kind of takes after her brothers as well to survive. But also my why on this issue is understanding how education plays such an important role into making sure that not only, as a labor economist, we like to joke that wages are life scorecard, which sounds kind of crude, but economists get that. But also,
We are kind of crude.
We
That's
are
kind
kind
of
of
how it
crude, and that's why people don't like us very much. But also, that education is an important aspect for mental health, physical health, marriage and family health, and civic involvement. Without education, all of those things start to falter. And so discussing these trends like we'll do today amongst men, I think is just so vitally important, and isn't a real discussion that we've been having on our college campuses as well.
Thank you, Mike. Zach?
Yeah, hi, I'm Zach Bourne. I'm with Apprenticeships for America. And I come to this conversation around building a national movement around apprenticeships. This has been a movement that's been going on for about 10 years. We've expanded apprenticeships across the United States by about 86%, which is a really unknown story in the US. And so today we're at about just under 700,000 apprenticeships. That would equal the 10 largest public universities. And so really our North Star is to continue that trend, to go from 700,000 to 4 million, because these are really transformative opportunities to get into the middle class and grab that first rung of the ladder. And my why comes through 2 things. First, my faith. So, you know, I'm a big believer in Matthew 5, that we look to the least among us and bring them up. And my second why is my dad. So my dad was an apprentice in northern Indiana. He was a meter technician. He did a 5-year apprenticeship. And I would say that is the reason we were even close to being in the middle class, because he had a job, he had purpose, he found dignity through that work, stayed with the company for 46 years, had a pension, had health care. We didn't have everything we needed, or everything we wanted, but we certainly had everything we needed, including a boat. So, I mean, my dad did really well by working with his hands.
Thanks, Richard.
I'm Rich Nine. Good morning again, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here and discuss this important topic. So I'm Senior Advisor for Education with Governor Cox in the Governor's Office, and there's, as part of that portfolio, is clearly public education, that K-12 space, but for me it's a continuum, PK-20, right? So it's public ed to higher ed, and all the different pathways that we need to create and the systems we need to analyze to make sure that those systems are working well and serving all of our students, right? Not only our young adults and children from elementary to high school, but those that are post-secondary and what opportunities might exist for them there. My why in coming into this is a first-generation college student, and I went on a football scholarship. Go Weber State, go Wildcats, right? And as that 18-year-old, I entered college not really knowing what I was doing, right? And so as I was sitting there, I was skipping classes. And I had a coach come to me and says, Rich, what are you doing? I'm like, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm here to play football. He's like, no, you're not. You're here to get an education. And it was at that point that all of a sudden the light started switching, had some other life experiences, blew out my knees, realized football wasn't going to be that path, but I had someone. My parents certainly were supportive, but it was while I was in that space at that time that I needed what was an intervention to re-guide my focus. So I come to it that way, and another why is I have 3 children that my wife and I have raised, boy, girl, boy, and I want, the conditions my wife and I created for them to help them be successful, I want that for all the students in our state. And there's multiple pathways to success in how we get there, but I want those same types of opportunities for everyone.
Absolutely. And so this conversation is very explicitly about the idea of pathways to opportunity, because we, I think, all feel that opportunity is critical for men and women to be thriving in society. But I do want to start with a more traditional conversation about what's happening on college campuses, which I think we often default to as thinking of the primary mechanism for creating financial, economic opportunity for humans in American society, but especially in the context of this conversation. So we'll start there. If Mike, you could just give us kind of an overview of where we are on that front. What is happening with men's participation in college, their success in that endeavor?
Yeah, and I think what's really important when we talk about college is making sure that we account for some myths that are out there. One myth is that college enrollments are on the decline. People don't go to college anymore. Overall, college enrollment is actually up. People are seeing the value, the gap between high school diploma and what we, like our traditional spot would be high school diploma and bachelor's degree, has actually been widening. And especially for young men, as traditional jobs that only required a high school diploma begin to disappear, the need for some kind of certificate or post-secondary education is really stark. If we look at kind of the timeline, around, before about 2000, if you went on a college campus, you would see about a majority male population, particularly in STEM and other different fields. But about the 2010s, what we saw is a great reversal. And then within the last decade, kind of a bit of a slump in male enrollment. And so right now, the universe of higher education, a college campus is about 40 to 42% male and about 60% female. That's actually a number that's lower before we had enacted Title IX, and we were worried about the reverse trend. And when you kind of talk about this amongst my colleagues, they don't believe me, and then the new semester starts, and they come back, and they're like, wow, it's true. Now, what I want to help paint a picture of is many times when we think about college, we think about maybe like an Ivy League school or a selective university or a military academy like I used to teach at, but the vast majority of colleges are open admission. And so that means that if we want to boost populations that go to college, it does not take a spot away from someone else. And that's another myth that sometimes we hear, is like, well, if we help men, then that means women can't go, and when they lose, that's not true.
So circling back to the earlier conversation about this not being a zero-sum conversation,
Exactly.
and very explicitly, in the case of traditional higher education, bachelor's degrees, you're saying this is absolutely not a zero-sum.
Not a zero sum. I mean, our alma mater is an open enrollment university, and so there's no zero sum at play here. The last part that we'll probably talk about this in the course is also the cost of college. We're both economists, right? And so you hear things like you're going to balloon and take hundreds of $1,000s of student loans in college, and that's not true as well. The typical university, half the students don't take out any debt. Those who do, my nieces and nephews are sick of me telling them the statistic. It's about $27,000, which is about the same as the used car that they purchased, right? And in Utah in particular, because of the leadership in the state, the vast majority of USHE's public universities, a Pell Grant would cover most, if not all, of the tuition there. And so those are some of the myths that I think go to young men and help dislodge them from that college path. And again, as Lieutenant Governor Henderson pointed out to me, the word "and," I like to say all of the above because I'm an economist, so we use 5 words when you can use 1, right? But I think it's important that when as we talk about apprenticeships and other pathways, it's an "and," not an either-or as well.
Zach, so you've been a longtime champion of apprenticeship, and I love this idea. It's a model that I think most people who work in the space of exploring opportunity wish there was more of. And so you're sort of coming to this conversation as an expert on apprenticeship, but there's also this sense that this is a mechanism that could be really supportive of the specific issues that are facing men and boys. So tell us, what do we know, what does research tell us about how does this style of learning, and we'll talk about apprenticeships as a substitute or complement to college, but also just the idea of like career and technical education in the K-12 space, this kind of hands-on learning. What do we know about how that works for men and boys?
Right. I think there's a couple of factors that we're starting to learn a little bit more about the advantages of apprenticeships, especially for men. But just looking at the data, 700,000 apprentices across the U.S. Ends up being about 0.3% of the working population. So pretty small. at least in the US, in comparison to some of our competitors like Switzerland, Germany, the UK, Austria, Australia. But 85% of those apprentices are men. So I think that this is actually a feature and not a flaw of the system, as a lot of previous administrations had really taken on in terms of opening it up. It's also not, when we expand apprenticeships, it's not zero-sum either, because when we expand apprenticeships into new industries, we also help girls and women into really good jobs. But the data really bears it out, that the average apprentice who completes their program earns about $80,000 on average, and in comparison to their peers, earns $300,000 more over their lifetime. So you're talking about a huge opportunity for young men and boys to really prove themselves, to show other girls and women that they're providers and protectors, and also that it gives them an opportunity to really to learn from a mentor and someone who's mastered that occupation. So not only are they teaching them a particular occupation, whether it is being a software developer or being an engineer or an electrician, which we need a million more of, but it's also that man-on-man or girl-on-girl interaction that you have every day about how to live your life well, and how to kind of take on the challenges of the day. And I think that's really the special sauce around apprenticeships that we don't see in any other teaching or education model, is that master to mentor model that really is the passing of knowledge from one generation to the other. And I meet a lot of young boys, and I'm sure everyone in this crowd knows a young boy who's just like, I don't want to go to school anymore. I'm so sick of sitting in a classroom. I want to get to work. I want to earn money.
This is my second grader, by the way. So
yeah, exactly. I want to get to work. I want to get excited. And once they get that paycheck, they're like, oh my gosh, the light turns on. They're like, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a truck, and I'm going to ask that girl out on the date. And they find purpose in life. They say, money can't buy you happiness. There's an old country song that says, but it'll buy you a boat. And it'll buy you a truck to pull it.
Okay, I think that's a takeaway from the panel. We can wrap it up now. The apprenticeship buys you a boat.
The state of Tennessee agrees with the boat and truck, by the way.
But Zach, you said something, and I want to come back later to, what are kind of some barriers to the expansion of these alternative models that could serve men better. But you said something that, prompted a question in me, which is this idea that, historically apprenticeships have served men. I wonder, since we have really had a dramatic change in the way that I think it's socially or politically acceptable to talk about men's issues, do you think that there will be increased attention from policy perspective to apprenticeship because of this new permission, implicit permission to talk about issues and focus on policy interventions that support men?
I think we're looking at a couple of different factors that are occurring at the same time. Number one is we're starting to see that the college premium in comparison to other roles isn't paying off as much. We're also seeing the hollowing out of the entry-level job because of artificial intelligence and globalization and a number of different factors. So we do see this really bipartisan movement around apprenticeships that doesn't have to be zero-sum. When we expand apprenticeships for industries, we expand them both for men and women. It just happens to be that men have really been in a lot of the trades, which have been in construction and manufacturing, really kind of male-dominated industries. But through this expansion that we've had over the last decade, we've seen women's participation in apprenticeships also increase. So going from about 6% from 10 years ago all the way up to 15% today. So again, not zero sum, so we're helping out and lifting all boats. as we move along. And I just really don't think that success should look like the Hunger Games in the United States, where we're fighting over diminishing resources. Through apprenticeships, we really expand the pie. And so that's really kind of the effort that we're taking up to Capitol Hill and through states like Maryland that has, sorry to say, has expanded apprenticeships much larger than Utah. That's where I'm from. So they've expanded by 200%. But it is also a good story for Utah. Utah has expanded by 63% over the last decade. But there are just some things that states and the federal government can do to incentivize employers to get off the fence about training people and training people for the talent that they need today.
Well, Rich, Zach sort of just threw down on Utah and the lack relative to, was it Maryland, of this?
It's Maryland where I'm from, Governor Westmore.
Okay, but I will give credit to Utah because even though I'm a Utah resident, a proud Utah resident, I mostly work in federal policy in Washington, D.C. And I will tell you that I'm constantly hearing praise for Utah and the emphasis on work-oriented learning of all sorts, K-12 through higher education. So unlike Zach, I won't beat you up over that, but tell us a little bit about where those efforts have been, where are the governor's priorities on this?
No, I appreciate that. And, we're not a competitive bunch at all, so just we'll get there. And,
you got to keep it spicy for these panels.
And you may have done some things good, but we're going to improve on that, make it even, I'm just kidding, it's all in good fun. And we learn from each other, right, and what works, what doesn't, and how we need to serve our citizens the way that they ought to be served. So in Utah, certainly we're not resting in this space. The Governor Cox, Lieutenant Governor Henderson, as part of Built Here, that second term priorities. One of those areas is on a couple different fronts, this very thing, expanding those opportunities, those pathways, increasing skilling or upskilling, reskilling by certain percentages. I mean, we're tracking these things and creating the systems to deliver on those. In Utah, we have a lot of career and technical education opportunities, right? And we partner with the tech colleges, public ed, partners with the Utah system of higher ed. We have career and technical education opportunities which are reach down into that high school space. And for a student, and imagine this, for a student, and we have high graduation rates in Utah already, right? But I mean, we're around 84, 85%. But for a student that just completes 3 credit hours in high school in one career and technical education pathway, they are 99% likely to graduate. 99% of them do. And for those that just do 1.5 credits in a career and technical education, 94% of those students, they find this relevance. That's one pathway. Career and technical education is one pathway. Sometimes that doesn't always end in an industry credential or an apprenticeship opportunity or an internship or an externship. But that's one option, one opportunity. When it comes to apprenticeships in Utah, and we need more of that. As a former superintendent, 2 different districts, Ogden School District and Granite School District, I met with a group at one of our tech colleges. I met with a group of CEOs, and they're like, look, superintendent, if for every student that you have that graduates that automated manufacturing and gets that credential at your school, I have 10 jobs waiting. 10 jobs for every student. We need them for us. What can we do? What are the barriers to getting there? I'm like, pay them. Creating a paid apprenticeship. A lot of these students, and particularly all students, right? Our young men or young women, but a lot of our students, instead of doing that internship or externship or their apprenticeship that's after school, they're going to work a swing shift to help pay for the bills and put food on the table at home to help their family. And they're going to find the job that's going to allow them to do that. So a lot of the CEO says, done. We can do that. And I'm like, well, what other barriers do we have to increasing the number of opportunities for our students to find this relevance, gain this industry credential, this on-the-hand work experience? And they're like, well, what happens if they get work while they're employed with us or while they're working for us, in this apprenticeship? I don't know that our liability and insurance and things like that. Great. You know what? We can attack this through policy. So House Bill 555, and when bills get into the 500s, it's been a long session, but this became a priority, and we said, hey, House Bill 555 in 2023, we said, all right, you know what, and we're going to define youth apprenticeship in code. right? And because it needs a very specific code. We're going to cover under our state risk or our state insurance policy, all those, and we're going to classify them volunteer government workers, paid or unpaid, these apprenticeships, and we're going to allow that liability to rest with the state. And the employer said, great, we need to increase and expand that. Then we followed that up in 2024 with Senate Bill 122, and we said, we need to understand what is occurring in our state. We're going to launch this study. We're going to prioritize this effort to grow what are these apprenticeship opportunities, and thankfully we are. And so there's these paths, and for us, we have registry, and we have some policy cleanup to do this session. We have a few different efforts, a couple different definitions of apprenticeship even in our state. But we're working on that. We have youth apprenticeships, clearly that's public ed, running through the State Board of Education. We have registered apprenticeships that run through the Department of Workforce Services. And then we have other efforts with USHE and the Talent Ready apprenticeship continuums there. So we have these different efforts, and we're going to bring all those in alignment to better serve our students. The registered apprenticeship side of it, we have about, what did we say, 4,800.
Yep. About 300 programs across the country.
Yep. And for Utah, it's playing out very much the same. We have about 85–90% of those participating in registered or apprenticeships are male. And so we need to expand those opportunities and incentivize companies to want to do registered apprenticeship. And I've held the mic too long in my airtime. I need to monitor it. But the passion's there for our state, right? So I got to compare to Maryland here. But anyway. But at the end of the day, what we're really looking at is saying, hey, how do we expand that? What do we need to look at in our systems? What are the barriers? And then for us, we're saying, hey, we have opportunity that's still untapped, and we're aggressively going to pursue that over this next session and on.
Well, I love it, and I am looking forward to following that effort along the way. Mike, as you said earlier, this is not this or that. We need all types of education to serve all types of people, regardless of gender or anything else. What, in your view, as you think about what's challenging for young men in higher education, what are the changes or interventions that might be successful in supporting men to maybe return to college or be more successful in completing? And just to acknowledge, we kind of talk about there's the work-based learning versus the classroom learning, and a lot of times these are kind of, there's a fuzzy line between them. So I know we're not talking exclusively one or the other, but in your sense, where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple pathways. Let's take kind of build off the discussion of apprenticeships and technical college. Again, one of the great things about technical college and apprenticeship is it gives me an income boost now. So very quickly, I can now go from low, like essentially poverty, to scaling up towards the middle class. And that is fantastic. One of the issues that we do have, though, is it plateaus a bit, unless you're going to like own your own plumbing firm or own your own business. And so what I've tried to talk to folks about, again, is in our high schools, we track almost too quickly. We say, I identify as a nerd American, right? And so in high school, I was in all the AP classes, and that meant they told me, don't bother taking plumbing or shop or those things, or CTE, because you're going in this direction. But some of my friends that I hung out with, they would say, why are you taking calculus? We're going to shove you over into this direction. And what I think what we need to do is remove some of these tracks and allow the AP Calc kid to take shop, to understand those skills, and also try to help kids who don't think they're college ready realize that they actually are. And it's an information problem that we have. They're also complementary. A lot of people don't go to college because they're concerned about the cost. So if I can go become a farm tech or a certified nursing assistant or a plumber's apprenticeship and be able to then use those wage gains to open up an opportunity to pay for college, that's also a fantastic pathway as well. And I think one of the last parts, too, is understanding that, as economists, we call it an endowment of skills, right? Which normal person talk means. Sometimes we're just talented in many different things, and we try to specialize that, engage in markets. The most genius person I've ever met is my auto mechanic when my car breaks down, right? And he's like, I don't care about AP, Calc 3. Let's fix your radiator. I'm like, I don't know what's going on with this thing under the hood, right? And so that's the beauty of markets, is that then we can engage in this kind of trade. So telling a kid that he's a failure because he becomes a master mechanic is a shame. But also telling a kid, you're not college worthy, college costs too much, there's no more wage gains, when that's not true, that's also a shame. And so what we're doing is creating a network of pathways for the individual to achieve their potential, I think is huge.
Can I just respond to that?
Please, yes.
I think from some of our peer countries, like, so I've been to Switzerland a couple times. They have this amazing apprenticeship system where 70% of young people do an apprenticeship. 30% go to college. Switzerland is the most innovative country on the planet. High wages, high labor participation. I think what we need is, and what they use this term called permeable. So they have a permeable system where you can go from apprenticeship to higher ed, back and forth, and they value both. And we're starting to see some innovation here in the United States on that topic. I've been working with a group called Reach University, which is an all-online university that's now taken on this idea around apprenticeship degrees. So you're becoming a teacher and you're getting a degree at the same time. You're becoming a nurse and you're getting a degree at the same time. So you're connecting the learning to the actual job. I think for a lot of young men, as they sit in a classroom and are busy fussing over who is the president of the United States in 1860, and like, oh my God, I can't sit here anymore. They need some connection to that learning, to the actual hands-on. And there's some research that we're looking at now that's coming out in that boys and men do actually really well when they make that connection and do that hands-on work, and allows them to have real connection and real purpose and dignity as they go along in that apprenticeship.
Okay, we're saying a lot of buzzwords here. We're being very academic, so I'm going to bring us back down to earth with an anecdote about being in a McDonald's just the other morning. I was getting my morning Diet Coke, as I do, as a Utahn, and I overheard a conversation with some high school students who I think had walked over on their early lunch break, and one of them had secured some sort of apprenticeship opportunity for after they finished. And he was describing to his buddies who were kind of, giving him a hard time. And, he was really trying to sell it as this great opportunity that he had found for himself. And his buddies thought that he was getting scammed, that there was, he'd signed up for something and that this was a scam. And they thought this doesn't exist. And I thought, gosh, I would love to just go give this guy a high five for what he has found for himself, but who wants to have a high five from a random middle-aged lady in McDonald's? But I thought this.
If they knew how cool you were.
If they only knew, right? If they only knew. But how do I get past that? I mean, we have students go on their Instagram pages and announce their college acceptances, and this is the culture of American higher education, of American opportunity. So if we care about advancing opportunity for young men, we need to increase the cultural significance of these alternative pathways. I mean, how do you get there from where we are today?
Yeah, just a short story. I got a chance to meet.
But did it happen in McDonald's? Because
it did not happen at McDonald's,
Okay.
but it did happen in Baltimore, which is a great American city. It involves Senator Cory McCray, who just wrote a book called The Apprenticeship That Saved My Life. He is the only member of the Senate in Maryland that has done an apprenticeship. And he came up with he told me the same thing. I interviewed him a couple weeks ago, and he said when he did his IBW, the electrical apprenticeship, that he too thought it was a total scam. He's like, you're going to pay me to learn and work, and you're going to pay me how much? And had never heard of this opportunity to apprentice. And it was only because he had been in and out of incarceration, had been in juvenile detention, and his mom never gave up on him. And he got out jail for the last time. His mom hands him the list of apprenticeship programs in Maryland and says, you need to do this. I'm not giving up on you. And he shows up. And it was just that the men and women at IBEW that believed in him allowed him, from this point of being really incredulous about the opportunity, to actually now as we talked about earlier, he's an entrepreneur. He owns, a dozen houses. He's now a senator. It's this, we need to start telling the story of how young people can go from being apprentice to CEO to senator. And we do see some states doing some of that work where they have signing ceremonies, just like your NFL players are putting on their hats and they're signing their contracts and their jerseys. So John Deere does this. So John Deere gives, in Iowa is signing up, 20 new apprentices to become welders. They're all getting their hats and their parents are in the crowd. They're excited, they're cheering. And so this is the type of excitement that we can create at the state level where we really value apprenticeship and work-based learning.
I love that. I'd love to be at one of those ceremonies. Go ahead, Mike.
Can I run a regression really quick from the
No,
data
absolutely
points?
not. You're off the stage.
Do you notice that there's a theme in a lot of the comments here? And the regression I'll run, the connect the dots here, is that it came from someone that cared about you. That mentorship is so important. This is something I think about as, they say AI will take my job. What should I do as a college professor? And that's, excuse me, that's mentorship, really helping a student. I think what we miss out on is that, like David Brooks sometimes says, is sometimes we elites, if you want to use that word, don't preach what we practice. We don't reach out and actually help people. A real quick anecdote, which economists don't like to do, but a quick one, is a couple years ago, Representative Karen Peterson, who's not here today, invited me to come to her committee and discuss at the Utah State Legislature. And as I was walking across the rotunda, I heard someone yell, "Brother Kofed, what are you doing here?" And I turned around, and in my church, I was asked to mentor young men. And one of these young men in New York was a Haitian immigrant who had no idea what he wanted to do with his life. And so our group, we helped him complete his FAFSA. We helped talk to him through his grades. And I had no idea he was there, but he was there as the BYU student body president. And I think about if we can reach out and help students either find their passion through an apprenticeship, help get them on the college track, that really is what helps a lot of people, is working on the one.
Absolutely. I mean, even in this conversation where we tried our darndest to focus on the dollars and cents and the regressions, it does come back to personal.
Chetty shows it pays off. Mentorship does pay off, so it's okay.
Right, okay, as long as Chetty says that, we're okay. But we have just a few minutes left, but I think what I would love to do is, take the opportunity. We're in this moment where we have lawmakers and the public paying attention to this critically important issue. I mean, given each of you has a really important and special perch in this conversation, in this ecosystem of opportunity for men, I mean, where do you think we're paying insufficient attention, or where would you like to highlight the need for more, attention, resources, energy to go? And Rich, do you want to start at the end down there?
Sure. No, I appreciate this this thought, because it's asking us to say where do we still have gaps, where do we have opportunity to improve. We're not looking at this that we're failing, although I think we are failing some people. We are. So our systems, we have to analyze that and say, well, how might it be different? How might it be better? And so as we're thinking about that question, there's a lot of different policy levers that we can certainly pull on, and we're going to continue to do that. And I mean, that's at the macro, right? What are we doing as a state? What are we doing to prioritize this work through policy? But then if I could go to the most micro, it really is a one-on-one conversation. And how do we create the systems for it to allow for that counselor in a high school, early in that, that 9th grade student coming in, that 14, 15-year-old sitting with their parent, when that, the parent's available to engage like that for those students, where do we have that conversation and say, look, all this stuff that we're doing here in this educational experience, what is your dream? What is it that you want to do? And then obviously, and you, as a career educator, I mean, that's what we get to do. We get to say, okay, well, let's put together that path to help you realize your dream. And it comes down to that individual level, but it takes someone to have the conversation that maybe sees something in that young man sitting across that table that the young man might not see in themselves, and pulling out what is opportunity and placing it before them and says, you know what, we can make this happen, let's work together and let's do that. And we can do more of that to the degree where we're identifying opportunities that exist. It's been said, and it's been a fundamental shift. And again, not by anecdote, but there's research to support it. It used to be an either-or option, where you either went to college or you went to, and we called it vocational education back then, right? It's an and. It is an and. And I don't know that a lot of people understand the and behind it. And there's multiple pathways that we can take to get there. We just have to have the discipline and the prioritization of that effort to realize those outcomes. And when we, I mean, even on apprenticeships, as much as we're expanding those opportunities, we need willing industry partners to engage in this. We need willing institutions of higher education when it comes to degree apprenticeships to engage in this work together. And we have the right people in our state to come together and do that and expand those opportunities. Again, not just for men and boys, where 80, 85, 90% of them are participating in our apprenticeship programs as a pathway. And those are the constructions, the cybersecurity, the computer science, and now the healthcare industries are coming to the table. We need to expand that to males and females across our state, and we have the capacity and I think the desire and the passion to make that happen.
Rich, did you want to suggest where you think we should be spending some more energy besides just making more apprenticeships?
No, I think I think I agree with the and statement, but we just haven't gone and enough. So, you know, our current education system is really hell-bent towards higher education. We spend $1,000 for every $1 that we spend on apprenticeships. So we have a system that's set up where we have a plan for 30% of our population, and the other 70% we say, there's some other stuff out there, but we don't really know. There's college, and then you might make it in something else, but we can't really say what that system is. And we really haven't invested in that system. And I think there's a real willingness now to have a look at where college is not working and where other alternatives could really work, but we have to really think about it in a more systematic way. And that's what apprenticeship does really well. It systematizes learning, and it systematizes how we arrange our economy to make sure industries, when they need workers, can show up and they have the skills that they actually need today, not 4 years from now. And so, you know, our advantage here is that we've really not been invested in apprenticeships in this country, so our trajectory is just up from here. And that's a really good thing. But we do need policymakers to get really inventive about how that up happens and how quickly up occurs. And so if we're really serious about the working class, the way President Trump campaigned and got men and boys on his side, we really need to offer tangible ways to getting into the middle class. And apprenticeship just is the most practical, honest, and most purposeful way that we can really build middle class jobs and a middle class future that allows us to be competitive. But we need business to engage. And we need organizations, whether that's industry associations or unions, nonprofits, to be out there helping design and organize those apprenticeships, because employers just don't know how to do it yet. And so there's that yet where I'm really hopeful that we can get there for our future.
And Mike, I'll give you the last word. Where would you love to draw the attention of lawmakers and civic leaders in this space?
Yeah, 3 very, very quick dissertation-worthy comments. One is on cost, Utah ranks 49th of 50 in FAFSA completion, helping people complete that FAFSA and be able to afford college. Second, inclusivity. One of the great ideas I've seen in Utah comes from one of my mentors, the new USU president, Brad Mortensen, when he was at Weber, because it was open admission. They just started going to high schools and telling students, you're admitted, you belong, come here. And the last we didn't spend a lot of time on, but Richard's talked about, is heal jobs. Being able to get young men to go into health, health, administration, education, and literacy. My male high school history teacher thought I wasn't a very good writer because I was a math nerd. Unfortunately, he was on the planning commission with my mom. So he went to her and said, Mike needs to step it up. I became a really good writer that year because I was scared someone was watching. That's why we need more men in education, especially our K-12 as well. Thank you.
Thanks. In just a moment, I'm going to hand this off to Sean Newell, who's going to host our next panel conversation. But please join me in thanking the panelists for this really great conversation.
Wonderful. Can we get our panelists up here for this next session? Well, thank you, folks, for being here. This has been a wonderful morning we've had so far. We've got a lot of information. It's great to have these three panelists here. For my panelists, what I want you to do is take 1 minute to start us off and just tell people a little bit about yourself, who you are, what brought you here today, and why it's important that we have this conversation.
I'll start since I'm the furthest away. I'm Patrick Jeffries. I'm a father of a 16-year-old and a brand new 13-year-old. I have been an educator for 25 years. I've worked in our public schools, I've worked in charter, I've worked in private, I've taught at higher ed, and I also have spent a good portion of my life being an advocate for fathers. I did fatherhood education and masculinity education for young men for quite a few years. And I come from this from both having been an educator and somebody who's thought deeply about it around research, but also somebody who's worked very closely with young men and fathers to help them be the kind of young men and fathers that they really want to be.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. You heard from me earlier. My name is Ian Rowe. I am a husband, father of 2 children. I'm here, and actually, as I've reflected on this morning, just listening, the reason I'm here, I'm constantly trying to figure out ways, how do we start the clock ticking earlier on engaging more young people on the very institutions that would put them on a path where we would avoid many of the issues that we're all concerned about. And then I'm here also to think about how do we remove the barriers to good schooling, to good apprenticeship opportunities, for opportunities to engage their faith. How do we make those on-ramps to engaging these institutions far easier for young people?
Good morning. It's an honor to be with you all. My name is Rabbi Avrami Zippel. Like my fellow panelists, I come at this from a few different angles. As a husband, a father of 3 boys, and 1 little girl who's probably feistier than all of her brothers, which is something we should probably talk about. In addition, in my work, from a clergy perspective, when I took my position, I was given over the responsibility to work with youth, which over the years has metastasized. I run a preschool, and I also work with young adults. So I'm working with, the next generation, starting from infants and toddlers all the way through young men who are getting married, starting families and lives of their own. Perhaps what's most personal for me for this topic is I also come to this space pretty deeply involved in the mental health world. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. I did make the decision to speak out quite publicly about that as a young man with a lot of the taboos and stigmas and things attached to that, which is a topic that I'm deeply passionate about. And so very much excited for the opportunity to discuss and learn about creating a space where young men can succeed in being their best selves, become excellent husbands, fathers, functional members of society, and really contribute to the moral fabric.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to take a little different pathway here. I'm going to ask each of you the same question. That is not to invoke debate, but to gather different perspectives from each of you. I hope that's okay with you. Let's start off with, what in your opinion is the most critical issue facing concerns around men and boys in our state and our country? Patrick?
I guess I get to go first. I think from my experience, the real issue is around helping men and boys understand that the way that they can be the most successful is when they become the fullest sense of who they are, and remove the barriers around the definitions of what it means to be a good man and a good father. And then it allows our young men and our fathers, they get to define who they want to be and how they want to participate in life, so that they can find the fullest version of it to support the people around them and have the experience of being around their children and their families in a way that fulfills them in a very deep way. In a lot of ways, Dr. Reeves' comment about thinking about fatherhood as a policy was one half and not thinking about the impact on the other is spot on, because we'll talk about, and I would often talk about in my work, the benefits that families get from having fathers who can fully participate. Part of, I think, the reason why that works is because the fathers get something from it and cause that engagement, and from that interaction is where the actual benefit happens. It's not just because dad showed up. He knows what to do, he knows how to do it, he finds fulfillment in it, he gets something from it, and it makes a difference in his life as he's making a difference in the people around him. And that's the reason why we see maternal health outcomes improve when fathers are involved. Infant mortality goes down. Children are more likely to read on grade level by third grade. We see less discipline issues in middle school when fathers are involved. And so that's kind of where I think can come from, it is to help expand it so that fathers can bring what they have to offer and get what they should from it.
Great, thank you. Ian?
The way that I answer the question, my concern for boys, I think it would depend on the context in which you are born. If you, in New York, if you were born in Pelham, New York, where I live, which is a lovely town in Westchester, you're most likely born into a community in which you have married, parents. You have access to pretty good public schools and probably pretty good private schools because the families can afford to have that choice. Strong faith community. So there, the concerns would be different. It's almost concerns of privilege in a way, and those can be real as well. But as the crow flies, 4 to 5 miles away, where we opened up our high school in the Soundview community in the Bronx. If you're born there as a young boy, you're most likely born to non-married parents. You're most likely born to a household where the father is not resident. The proficiency rate in Soundview in District 12, only 7% of kids graduate from high school ready for college, meaning that there are about 2,000 ninth graders that start in District 12. 4 years later, 93% have either dropped out or they did earn their high school diploma but still cannot do math nor reading without remediation. So that's a problem. So how I would answer the question of concern would be very much around the context, around birth. A lot of the factors that Raj Chetty talks about of just why there are certain communities that have more upward mobility. And so the thing I'm constantly trying to create is how do we make it so that, because there's no casting dispersions on the community in Pelham, but how do we create the conditions where the communities in Soundview have access to the same kind of opportunities earlier?
Wonderful, thank you.
I'm going to pick on some pretty low-hanging fruit, pick on an easy target, and we have policymakers in the room, but one that's not very easy to address from a policy perspective. I think the single most critical issue facing young men and boys in our country is the internet. And I want to kind of focus on that for a second, use more of a recent conversation that happened here in our community. On December 24th, we got a call that the FBI and Ogden police had arrested this young man who had made threatening posts on the internet, and they went into his house and they found pipe bombs and assault rifles, et cetera. And as information began to kind of come out around the charges and the nature of the suspect, et cetera, I said to our team, I said, watch what's going to happen. This is what we're going to learn in the coming days. This is not some radicalized young man who went overseas to a foreign country and had some deep, abiding belief in some sort of political system. We're going to find out this is a kid who came from a good home, who probably was in some sort of relationship for a little while and broke up out of that relationship, was experiencing some sort of heartbreak, went in some deep abyss of the internet, and just had that void inside him overrun and overtaken by the absolute worst of society that exists in the darkest corners of the dark web. And not to beat my own drum, but as some of the information has come out, that's actually pretty much been the case. This is a nice young man from Ogden, not too far away, solid home, and you look at some of the comments that have really kind of surfaced in some of the posts on X that have come out recently, and it's really kind of copy and paste of just the most baseline, ridiculous, asinine things that live on the internet that led a heartbroken young man to decide to build pipe bombs and say things that garner that sort of attention and that sort of credibility in the world that we live in today. Obviously, I don't think any of the policymakers in the room are going to shut down the internet anytime soon. I would support the idea, but I understand that's a little bit of a heavy ask, but I think that we have rudderless young men, we have rudderless young people, we have young people without an anchor in life who are just looking for something to fill the void, and more often than not, that void is just easily filled by the very worst of things that exist. And I think we do fix that by helping these young men establish healthy role models, by helping these young men understand that when they go through a breakup, like this kid inevitably did, there are healthy, masculine ways to respond to that sort of heartbreak so that they don't latch on to the only thing that seems to be calling their name.
Thank you very much. You must be reading over my shoulder.
That's why I wanted to sit here and kind of...
What ideas do you have concerning the interruption that social media has on impacting the well-being among our men and boys? And we'll start this one out with Ian.
Say the question one more time, sorry.
Oh, repeat it?
Yes. Yes.
What ideas do you have concerning the interruption that social media has on impacting the well-being of men and boys?
I think it's an abdication of bringing those other voices to the table. It's really easy when the loud voices are the only ones in the room. I'm going to use a little bit of an analogy. School teacher, the loudest kid in the room gets my attention. And how do you fix that problem is you start focusing on rewarding the behaviors that you want. If we want the right voices in the room, let's elevate them and make them be the primary ones that we all pay attention to and care about. I'm going to be honest, Andrew Tate gets too much press. I'd like his name to go away. I'd like to hear all of the other men who are doing really good things be the ones that we talk about in our conversations. When we have these conversations about the young men, stop with that name and bring the other men into the conversation, because then we're showing them who we really want them to pay attention to, and we can help them find those spaces. And so the medium that had been this sort of nefarious, evil place to go look now becomes the place where they can go find those voices and mentors and examples that they need, because we finally started using their name and started talking about it.
Thank you.
As it relates to how do you address the interruption of social media, adults need to be adults, institutions need to be institutions, and have far greater influence over the environments that kids are in. The reason social media has such omnipotent presence is that kids are left to their own devices. Kids are in their rooms, they've got, so I run schools. We don't allow phones. Every morning kids take their cell phones, their smartwatches, their AirPods, they put them into a pouch, it's locked for the day. And we didn't do that the first year that we opened our school. We operated on a trust system. That didn't work very well. But the next year, we did, and it's so interesting. So we've now had the quote-unquote ban for 2.5 years. If we were to reintroduce phones, I think our students would actually oppose us doing that. Because there's been such a, recess and lunchtime are just great. Kids are talking to each other. We have games, they're Monopoly, Connect Four. It just feels, like a childhood, like you're interacting. And so it's up to the adults and the parents to create environments where kids are engaged in real life behavior that's positive, that's nurturing. Social media isn't this like independent thing. And sometimes it's spoken about as if it's just happening and we have no control over it. And I find that a huge abdication of responsibility, actually.
I'm going to piggyback just on for a second on what Patrick said about kind of the replacing of those voices. I think that much as we can fight it and we can deny it, social media is going to play a role in our kids' lives inevitably in the future. I love what's happening here in the state, and I know that yesterday the governor announced a bill for this year to make it bell to bell, and I think that's remarkable to really kind of build on that momentum around cell phones in schools. But at the end of the day, it is going to be there to some point. Our kids are going to be online. And on the topic of replacing Andrew Tate as the voice that some of our young men are most hearing about, I had a fascinating conversation here in town a couple weeks ago. Seems like a mostly local crowd. For those of us that are long-suffering jazz fans, it's been a very bleak and cold winter. And we've all kind of had our hearts warmed to a certain extent that, there's some small victories to celebrate, and Keontae George is taking this leap, to the next level. Does anybody know what he attributes that to? His conversations with the team's therapist. And there was a small clip that went out on the team's social media about a month and a half ago where he talked about the fact that over the summer, he really tried to get his head right, and he's having these conversations. And I have no idea who this Dr. Craig is. As a fan, I thank him for his contributions to the team, but he talks about the fact that he's working with Dr. Craig, and he's getting his head right, and he's getting his head right, and his head's in the right place, and it makes such an impact on his performance on the floor. And I talked with someone who's in the social media space for the organization, and they said they realized how they kind of put out this innocuous clip of kind of a post-game shoot-around, and how well it did online because there were voices that were looking to amplify. Here is a young, successful athlete from an African-American background talking about the success that he's experiencing professionally because he decided to prioritize his mental health. So we talk about, let's not make Andrew Tate's voice the loudest in the room. Well, we can take it down, but what do we replace it with? And when we as a society can identify good, healthy content that can say to our young men, look at this guy, look at this athlete who's succeeding at the highest level, who is really in touch with what he needs to do to be as a productive and successful member of society, we can replace some of those more toxic voices with healthy role models in society that are pushing out that sort of content that our young men can see, and I think that that's really the path forward.
Yeah, and if I can add one thing, the important part that comes with it is somebody had conversations with those young men about what that means, and so there were people in their lives who had the skills and the ability to engage in that conversation, even if it was just a what did you think, and then listened carefully and helped continue that conversation. So it's not just elevating those voices, but making sure that the adults that are in the room around our young men can ask the right kinds of questions and support them moving in the direction that we know that they should be.
Wonderful, thank you. When we look at our systems of education, what would you say has the greatest impact on positive outcomes, and what creates the greatest disparate outcomes? Can we start, Ian, with you on that one?
What creates the greatest positive and what creates the greatest negative? Well, first of all, as someone who's run schools, pre-K, elementary, middle, and now high school, I'm quite cognizant of the fact that our education starts with kids at 4 to 5 years old. A lot has happened to children well before they enter our school system. And so part of the reason I focus so much on family structure and stable family structures from the outset is because what happens prenatal in ages 0 to 5 has a huge impact on how kids are prepared for school. And it's not a dodge by the K-12 system. It's just that we have to keep cognizant that our parents are our kids' first educators and their continued educators. So the reason why we spend so much time thinking about how to create more young people born into healthy married families is that will ultimately help the education system. As far as the K-12 system itself, the thing that helps the kids that grow up in Pelham, the things that would help the kids growing up in Soundview, is having the ability to choose the right school for their kid. The school that, in our school, It's organized around the 4 cardinal virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. And each morning, our students recite what we call I statements. So courage is I reject victimhood and boldly persevere, even in times of uncertainty and struggle. Every single morning, you know. I lead my life with self-discipline because I am responsible for my learning and behavior. That's the virtue of temperance. So we broadcast that to parents to say, if you come to our school, we're an international baccalaureate school, we have apprenticeships, we do all these wonderful things, and you are going to get an education steeped in virtue. When parents have the ability to see that, okay, that sounds really great, I'd love for my kid to go to that school, or you know what, I don't like that, I want to, for whatever reason. So choice, I think, is a fundamental element of the natural forces of people going into environments voluntarily is something that I think is crucial. And then once you're in a school, there's a ton of a discussion we can have, but knowledge-based curriculum, far more direct instruction, apprenticeships, like the things that we talked about, that we could have a much longer conversation about the elements within school, but I would start there.
Patrick?
This is a question that's kind of near and dear to my heart, working in schools for 25 years and then being a father. You're spot on when you say that it starts prenatal. One of the places I think we could make a change right now is when you get a chance, go take a look at what the parenthood education is at our 2 largest hospital systems. Nothing for fathers. It's absent. So we're already sending the message from the very beginning, you're not important to this process. The second portion is making sure that the institutions where education happens, men can participate the way that they want to. I have a great story that I tell when I work with schools to help them become more welcoming of fathers. It's called The Story of Two Dads. I was a elementary principal and I'm going to be very honest about this, would have individual in my office. I need to call home. I immediately pick up the phone, very unconsciously keep in mind I am a father with kids that were that age, and called mom immediately. Didn't even think twice about it. It was who I called because I didn't think about the dad being as a participant in that part of the education. The second part of that story is received a phone call from my son's school, and the school secretary, and those who know schools know that school secretaries run the place. They are probably the most important person there. Deep love and affection for school secretaries. Said, Mr. Jeffries, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've been trying to get a hold of your wife and she won't pick up. Your son is sick. Is it a problem if you come and pick him up? There are so many little pieces packed into that one little story that's being communicated to me as a father about my role in my son's education. I very quickly adjusted what the relationship should be with the school. But I think that we need to look at those sorts of spaces and the way that we provide education for our fathers and the way that we invite them into the institutions so that they can have the positive impacts that we see in the data, that we see in the research, and gives them that sense of I actually am a participant in the education that my children are having. The other portion is we absolutely need more men who are willing to be teachers. I'm a male who chose education, and the very first staff that I was on of 15 people, I was the only male in the building for middle school boys, the only male, which meant I got all the health classes. The next year we had 2. So we need that, and we need it from all levels of education. That includes the areas that a lot of men are sometimes hesitant to go into, in the pre-K or early elementary, all the way through all the levels of education. It needs to be something that when we talk to young men in schools about the possibilities, that we don't gatekeep on those kinds of careers that they could go into, the healing fields that we had heard earlier. So those are my quick ones. I have more. I can talk for this for hours.
Rabbi Zippel?
Yeah, so I actually want to just touch on the kind of the males in education thing. I'm going to come at this conversation. My co-panelists mentioned that K through 12 is sometimes a little bit later on in the game. So I spend a fair part of my day running a preschool. So, I'm pre the K through 12. One interesting anecdote just that came to mind as Patrick was speaking, I'm the only male member of faculty. So technically my title is, dean, and I'm the guy who signs the checks, and I have an entirely female staff, the director, the assistant director, all the leads, all the assistants, and the amount of conversations that we have had that have really been eye-opening as to, the expectation they have around dads. And I come to the defense of the dad sometimes. Like, well, I can't imagine that the dad, and I've learned a lot about how dads kind of almost start with the assumption of absenteeism, and they've learned a lot, I think, about how dads can be more involved, and there are ways to stop thinking about that automatically. I do want to speak for a sec about running a preschool and having the interaction with kids before they get into the K through 12 system. About 2 years ago, we had a situation, two little boys who were doing what little boys did, and they were struggling. And one of the methods that we implemented that was wildly successful and has become such a regular part of what we do is we were encouraged to find responsibility for these young men, these are 2.5-year-olds, in the classroom. Tasks, chores, jobs, give them a purpose. When they come to school every morning, they are reminded, they center their day around the fact that they matter in that environment. They have something important to contribute in that environment. And without their participation, the entire classroom environment is going to go wonky. In fact, about a month after we started this, one of the kids was sick, and his mom told him, hey, it's okay, we're going to keep you home from school today. And he starts crying to his mom that if I'm not in school, who's going to pick up the buckets? Like, the whole classroom is going to, the ecosystem is going to cease to exist because I have a job, because when I show up every day, there is something meaningful about in what I contribute to society. It's worked wonders in the way we kind of think about even kids from a very, very young age is imparting upon them some sense of purpose. At some point, I was going to finally use the rabbi card, but I'll share just from a spiritual perspective. There's a prayer that we recite in the Jewish faith first thing we do in the morning. When we wake up in the morning, as a kid, I was told we should do this before we brush our teeth. As an adult, I tell my kids we should do this before we check our phones. But this is the first thing that we do every morning, which is a 10-word prayer in English, which acknowledges the gratitude that we have to the Almighty God for giving us this day. And the basis is some folks didn't wake up this morning. There are some folks that the Almighty had decided they had run their course in this world, and today, right now, they don't have that purpose in this world, but the Almighty gave you the opportunity to start your day this morning. You did wake up this morning. You clearly have something to contribute to the world that none of the other 7 billion people on this planet can do in a way that is so uniquely yours, and it grounds your day in a certain perspective, and it gives you the philosophy and the bedrock to build your entire day around that. And I think we see that with kids from a young age, with young men from a very young age, and all the way up. The more they feel some level of contribution, of purpose, of enhancing the world in a unique fashion, I think the better off they'll be.
I want to thank you for that. Each and every morning I make that same prayer, being thankful for that day and the day that I'm able to contribute to my society, my community, and my family. Thank you very much. When we look at societal anchors, how important are various anchors, and how can these connections improve our men and boys situations and limit harm that comes to our men and boys? And will you start with this?
Was that me?
Yeah.
So societal anchors are an interesting one. Obviously, I come from a religious background, and it's easy for me to see faith as the token societal anchor. I had an incredibly transformative experience a year ago. I signed up my son, who was 9.5 at the time, to play junior jazz. I mistakenly checked the box that if they need an assistant coach, they should call me. Turns out they needed an assistant coach, and so I became, with my legendary coaching resume, became an assistant coach of my son's junior jazz team, 10 young men. Changed my life. Absolutely changed my life. 10 kids, different backgrounds. My son was the only one who wore a kippah to the games, obviously, but changed my life in the way the kids looked forward to getting together, got to know some of the parents, got to understand that some of the kids were struggling in school, were struggling socially. As it turns out, the composition of the team, all these kids were kind of not with anyone from their private lives, so they were not with their classmates. It was kind of a Mod Podge group of kids who all came from different backgrounds, but looking at the opportunities that they had for positive social connections, positive societal anchors, to get together, to be boys, to do something constructive, to compete in a healthy way, to form positive relationships with other young men, to learn about winning, to learn about losing, to learn about processing frustration in a healthy manner, really changed the way I think about so many things. So I think that societal anchors of any kind, and I'm not going to preach the religious card over here, make sure that our kids are going to church or going to synagogue or engaging in service, but even for folks who don't come from any sort of religious background, finding ways for boys to be boys with other boys in a healthy fashion, in ways that encourage them to be rambunctious and athletic and get a lot of that energy out, but that allows them to build cohesion. It allows them to form relationships. It allows them to take some sort of accountability for who they are. I cannot speak enough about the positive impact that has.
Before I jump to the societal anchors, just from the last question, just a nuance, sometimes not popular to say it. So on this idea of more men in education, yes, that would be great. I opened the first pre-K, all boys, elementary, and middle school in the Bronx. And so we had a concerted effort to hire male teachers, and we were somewhat successful, which was great. And some of them were great, and some of them were not. And so I just want to continue to highlight one's maleness does not supersede the importance of their ability to be an effective teacher. And one of the worst things you can do is actually leave male teachers in for the reason that they're male, because you're thinking, oh, there's somehow some greater impact, and you're not. So as long as when we have that conversation, we have a focus on the quality of the instructional force. In terms of societal anchors, well, I talked about them: family, religion, education, entrepreneurship. I start with family. My acronym is FREE. It's not IRF, right? F is first because family is the first and enduring institution that the kid is born into. They don't know anything yet. They don't know anything about religion yet. They don't know anything about education. They don't know about work. They know about who's caring for them, right? So that institution is why we have to spend so much time on thinking about how do we strengthen it in such a way that kids are given the best shot from the start. So that is why I spend so much time on that particular institution, then followed up by faith. And I think it's generally true that a stronger family foundation usually leads to a stronger faith foundation. And if those two things are true, that generally leads to a stronger educational foundation. And I think if all those things are true, that generally leads to a stronger work and entrepreneurship foundation. So the societal anchors are indispensable. And the thing I think is difficult for conversations like this, these institutions are important because they have expectations. And somehow we've come to a part of our society where we're chafing against expectations, or these are the rules against which we're saying we want you to live by. And so people seem to be repelled from some of these institutions, and maybe are now trying to create artificial interventions that try to replicate what these institutions are so indispensable in doing. And that, I think, is a very, I think it's a grave mistake. And so the more that we keep coming back to the importance of societal anchors, family, religion, education, entrepreneurship, and work, and this idea of developing a reverence for them, imperfect and yet still indispensable for the rising generation, I think is very important.
Thank you. Patrick?
For societal anchors, probably the perspective that I'll share is I agree with you on the need for strong families. I absolutely believe that. And I think one of the things that we can do along that is to help men learn how to be the best fathers that they can be. Because, we learn from our own fathers. And let's be honest, our own fathers are imperfect. And unless we have a mechanism to help young men who are entering that stage of fatherhood and that phase of familyhood, a way to assess and understand their own upbringing and then choose the kind of father that they want to be, oftentimes we're just replicating what had come before. And so having a way for us through all of the different social institutions we have, whether it's early education, whether it's in our formal schoolings, or a place where dads can get the development of their skills that they need to be successful. Because in a lot of ways, we don't develop men to be good fathers. Think about the toys that we hand kids traditionally. I'm speaking very traditionally and broadly. We hand young boys toys that are for work outside the home, and we hand young girls nurturing toys for inside the house. And not that that's good or bad. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that our young men and the men who are going to become fathers deserve more attention to help develop those skills so that they can be that very successful father, to participate, to find meaning in it, so that they can contribute to the family, to strengthen it the way that you say, and so that they can make those choices about faith, about education, about the way that they want to spend their life. And that becomes a more full version of a human being that gets to participate in that conversation.
The only augmentation I would offer and request to that is that in the same way we have this idea, this emphasis on fatherhood, preceding that, I would want an emphasis on husbandhood. There seems to be this thing that we often just leap to fatherhood with this idea that there are actually some things that, like if they happened before, you'll much more likely be a great father, right? And so this concept of husbandhood, one of my goals for 2026, is to make husbandhood a word that is in the common vernacular as much as we talk about fatherhood, as a necessary precursor to becoming a great father.
And if I can yes and really quickly, not just a good husband, but become a good partner in relationships and development towards that. So let's go, like you've spoken before, it starts early. We need to start very early with young men to help them develop the skills they need to be the kind of partner they need to be in each of those stages of relationship. So yes and.
I'm just going to take my chance to jump in as well. But I really appreciate the idea that husbandhood is the genesis of good fatherhood. On a slightly personal level, I'm dealing right now with a situation in a family where have become some pretty alarming patterns of domestic violence. And one of the really frustrating things is that this had gone unnoticed, unaddressed for a number of years, and the man in question had been identified as somewhat of a pretty demanding parent. He was a little too physical with the kids, kind of the grabbing and the shoving. And we, as loved ones around the situation, were like, my goodness, how do we deal with that? And then it comes to light that long before this man was a father, he was a husband, and for the longest time there had been some pushing and grabbing within the husband's role. And so I think, to really kind of parrot Ian's point, slightly deficient husbands are becoming really deficient fathers. And I think that by creating a society where husbandhood and being a strong partner in a relationship and handling conflict before we get to having kids is going to be the precursor and the impetus to being able to be a productive father in any sense, because I think if we're able to look at the trajectory of so many of the situations, we're going to find that those problems began long before there was fatherhood. There was that inability to handle conflict in a relationship, and it metastasizes into all of those situations.
I really love this idea of husbandhood. My kids are all grown. I've got grandkids now. And I told my wife, we had a very heart-to-heart conversation. I said, now we have to learn how to redate. So that you can understand why I'm still here as your husband.
That's
and
beautiful.
One of the things that I learned from this is my kids are watching now in a different way than they did when they were young. And it's very important to our family structure to continue and perpetuate, a father that's there, working with them, working with my grandchildren, and creating an environment that is positive and nurturing for everybody in the family.
I showed earlier the images of my parents getting married, and they used to talk a lot about when they were dating in Jamaica, and my dad used to pick my mom up on horseback for their dates. Like, just think about it. Just think of the imagery. It's just like
who says chivalry is dead, right?
Exactly, right. And in fact, anytime my dad wasn't doing what he needed to do, my mom would say, remember when you used to take me? Anyway, but there is something very powerful about, I love that idea, learning how to redate, like how the best thing a man, a father, can do for his child is to love his mother or love his spouse.
Yes.
Right?
Without a doubt. I want to thank our panel today. I want to thank you for taking the time to be here, for sharing with us, and for helping me learn, and hopefully helping the rest of the folks here in the room learn. Thank you very much for this morning.
Thank you.
Folks, we are almost finished for the day. I want to thank everyone for being with us. As we begin to wrap up, we're going to hear from Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson, and then I'll give some final remarks. And thank you again for being with us. And Lieutenant Governor Henderson, please join us.
Well, thank you, Nick. It's always hard to be, the last speaker or second last speaker after a long morning, but my goodness, time flew today. This was an incredible event. Thank you, Sutherland Institute. Thank you, Amy Newton, and everybody else who helped put this together. And of course, all our speakers and panelists. Really, really incredible. My name's Deidre Henderson. I'm Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Utah. I'm the second woman in a 130-year history of the state to be Lieutenant Governor. I have a point, and it wasn't to get applause, but thank you. In 2013, I was sworn in as a Utah State Senator. I'm a Republican. There are 29 state senators. At the time, 23 of them were Republicans, and 6 of them were Democrats. I doubled the number of Republican women in the Utah State Senate. We went from 1 to 2. When I left the Utah State Senate to become Lieutenant Governor in 2021, there were more Republican men named Dan in the Utah State Senate than there were Republican women. We had 3 Dans and 2 women. But one thing I learned when I got to the Senate, and it was very lopsided, I didn't think that it mattered if we had all men in the legislature or, that there weren't very many. I just didn't think it mattered. Policy is policy. But when I got there, I realized that it did matter. And the reason it mattered is because I had a different life experience than my male colleagues. And I likened it to walking around with one eye open. When you're seeing out of one eye, what you see is good, it's real, it's there, but it's not the whole picture. You need both eyes open to see the whole picture. And when I became Lieutenant Governor, my eyes were opened further. In 2023, when the governor asked me and several members of our cabinet and our senior advisors to read Richard Reeves' book of Men and Boys. And there were quite a few female senior advisors and female cabinet members and I who read that book and had a lot of discussions and invited Mr. Reeves to come out. And what I discovered was that we have been so intentional about girls over the past few decades in very good ways, healthy ways, ways that we need to keep doing. But also during that time, we stopped being as intentional about boys. And success and thriving is not just a natural occurrence. It is something that comes after intention. And we had stopped really being intentional about the way we talk about men and the way we talk and teach, educate our boys. That they learn differently than girls, more side to side than face to face. And that we have to start paying attention to this, that poverty affects boys differently than it affects girls. that girls have a higher likelihood of exiting poverty when they grow up than boys do if they grow up in poverty. These were all eye-opening statistics for me, eye-opening concepts that I had never really thought about, that our administration had never really thought about in that way. So over the past few years, we have tried to become more intentional. And I think the worst thing we can do is to believe in a false choice, that one must sacrifice the other, that you can't be intentional about boys and girls, that you can't be intentional about men and women. A year ago today was our inauguration for our second term as governor and lieutenant governor, and in my inauguration address, I talked about the power of and. This idea that our administration's focus on building for the future rests on the fundamental belief in the power of and we heard that a lot today. We can hold two thoughts at once. We can want success for boys and girls, for men and women. We can look to what specific policy changes need to be made to help men and women, boys and girls. And we can look to what other institutional, societal institutions, religious and community and family institutions need to be doing to make sure that everyone has a chance to thrive. And a couple of days ago, we had a literary symposium, a literacy and reading symposium. The First Lady is really leading out on literacy in our state, especially in early literacy. And she said something that was very powerful. She said, our literacy problems are a community problem, and they will require community solutions. And I suggest the same thing here today, that the problems that our boys are facing and our men are facing are community problems, and they will require community solutions. There is a place for government, there is a place for policy, but that's not the only thing that's going to help. It's not the only place. And so I hope we can all continue to focus on making sure that every individual has the opportunity, has the tools, has the skills that they need to make the most of their life, to find purpose, to find meaning, to be the best person, the best man, the best husband, the best father, the best woman, the best mother, the best daughter, the best whatever they are. Because they have the tools and they know that they have a place in society wherever they are. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what you have taught me. I think we've all learned a lot from each other, and we have a lot of work to do. God bless all of you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Henderson. I won't attempt to top the aspirational call to action that she left us with. Some final thoughts as we wrap up, and I'm going to be brief because I want to allow for some time for some mingling and discussion. I want to thank our folks at the Gardner Institute here. They've been incredibly generous and helpful with this beautiful venue. Whenever they tell us we need to get out of here, let's all please respond appropriately to that. But there are extra bagels and drinks and things like that, so interact with each other and have these conversations in an ongoing way. And one of the big things that stands out to me from all of this, and I appreciate something that the Lieutenant Governor said that also ties to what Governor Cox said earlier today, is this idea of different perspectives. And we heard some different perspectives today. So number one, don't shy away from debate or disagreement over these issues. If we're not pushing each other as a state and as a country, having difficult conversations at times about these important issues, we won't identify the best interventions that can make a difference. So channeling the disagree better mentality in the spirit that you saw today from all of our speakers, I think we can really be a leading state and help the nation in a way that's really constructive. And one of the other big takeaways, and the Lieutenant Governor mentioned this well also, yes, there's an important role for public policy, but public policy alone is insufficient to fix these issues. As a public policy think tank guy, sometimes that's kind of depressing that we can't just craft public policies that automatically fix all of this. But recognizing the role that government policy can and should play in association with the civic institutions, that's the balance that we need to strike if we really want to move the needle on these issues. So as we wrap up, here's a very rough framework to help us think about this moving forward. This is not exhaustive, and I want to stress that stay tuned for additional materials from the Sutherland Institute and recommendations. The American Institute for Boys and Men puts out wonderful material on these issues as well. So there's a lot of stuff to come to hone in on what we can do. But when it comes to health, especially mental health, we need to have a conversation as a state and as a nation about whether or not and to what extent our mental health apparatus is reaching those who truly need it in a way that actually gives them what they need to flourish. So that's point number one. Point number two on vocation. I think some of the lowest hanging fruit is on apprenticeships. We heard a lot of great discussion about that with some things that are already happening in other states and some things happening here in Utah. That's kind of maybe one of the most shovel-ready policy tools we have at our disposal, because that's something that government can play an important role in to help expand vocational opportunities, and as we heard, that can be expanded to everyone and perhaps in all sectors. Let's be aspirational. And then lastly, on purpose, we need more messages from our leaders, and I don't just mean elected leaders, civic leaders, and that's every single one of you, whether you're in the room or watching online. You are either a member of or a leader in some capacity in some kind of civic institution, whether it's through your job, your family, your faith association, a civic organization you're part of, anything that you participate in where you have a role, a responsibility, you were a civic leader. So ask yourself, what are the messages that I can articulate to those in my civic institution that creates stronger senses of connection and bonding and purpose that we've heard so much about today are really necessary, especially for those men who struggle. So to leave you with these final questions, number one, are public policy and civic institutions reaching those who need help with mental health in the way that they would respond to? Number two, where is the opportunity in education, training, and the economy that is untapped that we can expand to strengthen some of these pathways into the American dream? And then number three, let's ask each of us as we walk out the door, in my role in any and all the civic institutions I participate in, how can I increase the sense of connection and purpose that others in my institution can benefit from? Again, I want to thank all of you for being here. The conversation continues. Thank you to our speakers and our attendees. Thank you so much for being with us here. We'll end with that. Thank you.